This is Spirit Gym. Today's episode features a twist on our usual theme. Paul's guest is Jason Pickard, and Jason will be interviewing Paul. Jason is Paul's longest-standing client, having worked with Paul from his time as a billion-dollar portfolio manager on Wall Street through to his creation of the Abundance Archetype Method over a period of 12 years. You can listen to Jason's journey on previous episodes of Paul's podcast, including episodes 236 and 282. But today, Jason will be sharing his experiences of working with Paul and asking him some searching questions about Spirit Gym. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Wild Pastures. The sponsors' special offers and discounts are mentioned throughout this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast.
Well, hello, everybody. Today is a special event. My buddy Jason Pickard, who you've probably heard my amazing podcast with, he's the founder of the Abundance Archetype program, which is awesome, came to me one day with an idea. He said, Paul, why don't I turn the tables and interview you about Spirit Gym? I thought, well, that's a cool idea. That'd be fun to have me interviewed on my own podcast. And since Jason's spent 15 years coaching with me, he's probably done more personal work with me than anybody in the world and gone as deep as we can go. He's the one guy that knows a lot about what I teach, and he's also a member of Spirit Gym, so he's had a chance to look through it and be part of it. So Jason, welcome. I'm excited to be interviewed by you. That's really cool.
Yeah, man, it's so cool to be here with you. It's a nice little change, putting you on the hot seat instead of the
I love the hot seat, man.
hundreds of interviews you've done where, you get to kind of be in a different perspective. So I think hopefully it's enjoyable for everyone listening.
Oh, I'm sure it will be, and it's a great chance for me to share some depth on Spirit Gym and, and all the things we're going to get into, because I really just think I've talked, as you know, in bits and here and there in podcasts, and but I haven't had a chance to really explain to the public what Spirit Gym really is and get into it like we will today. So I won't spill the beans. I'll let you take it away, man.
Yeah. So, I think we should start off with some real basics, really, which is, I've been working with you for a while, and I've seen kind of copious notes and notebooks and lots of things coming together over the years. You've written over 10 books, I think 12 books and
15
books.
Oh, you mean prior to
Spirit Gym?
Oh, yeah, 11 books prior to Spirit Gym.
Many books and many offerings, but this seemed to be important for you at this stage of your life to synthesize and to integrate and put all of these things together. So, I just wanted to kind of start off with understanding why now. What was important about this time in history, this time in your life, and kind of the level that you've achieved in terms of why did you put Spirit Gym together?
Well, as you mentioned, I have right behind me here 13 notebooks full. I began doing the research for Spirit Gym over 10 years ago, about 5 years before I started putting it into the book form. And what I felt from my lifetime of coaching, I've been coaching people now, I'm going into my 41st year. And, coaching, being a therapist and dealing with all the issues that you're very aware of because you've been around me long enough to know what I deal with. And also traveling all over the world. Penny and I spent probably the better part of 25 years moving around the world constantly, and me teaching and lecturing all over the place in all sorts of different venues, from medical to chiropractic and osteopathic to physical therapy to massage therapy to strength coaching to personal training, etc. And also with 63,000 students, I'm quite in touch with what kind of challenges my own practitioners are dealing with, because they'll come to me when they have problems, or they say, what do you do with a case like this? And I looked at a couple of factors. One, 85% of the world population claims religious affiliation. But I saw that there was no spiritual connection in people. There was a lot of memorization of Bible passages or scriptures, but there was still a tremendous disconnect from the body. And a lot of the religions, as you know, don't really put the body in a very high place. There's a lot of body shaming and heavy body shaming in Christianity, and sinful. The body is sinful, and this kind of is a thing that runs through a lot of religions. And so I saw a lot of people just did not have healthy, loving relationships with their bodies, and that religion was not bringing them into connection with their body, and nor does it bring them into connection with nature. If you look at the Bible and what the story of Adam and Eve, and where you will toil in the thorns, and basically the earth is a place where you're going to be punished for your sin of eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I saw that people are very, very out of touch with nature as well. And it's really hard to have a healthy body if you don't have a healthy relationship with nature, because your relationship with nature really is sort of a mirror image of how you relate to your body. For example, people that don't have a good, healthy relationship with nature will buy processed, commercially farmed foods and fund the destruction of the environment, and then wonder why their body's not doing well all the time. And then when I have to introduce them to how to take care of their body and the importance of organic foods and regenerative farming and all these things that they're usually unaware of, all of a sudden they realize that the same thing that's damaging them, because it's what's damaging their food, is also destroying the entire planet. And so oftentimes they wake up, and then that leads to me working with them to develop a spiritual awareness. And as you know, I've studied so many systems and so many experts, and I saw that, for example, as much as I love the integral life system and Ken Wilber's teachings, it's highly, highly intellectual. You and I have had conversations, for example, about Jungian analysts, and we've both read a lot of books by Jungian analysts and experts. And it's very, very heady, and a lot of these people's bodies are very unhealthy. And so as I looked around the world and explored all the various experts, I didn't see an integrated approach. The closest I've ever come to an integrated approach to spiritual development was Yogananda's teachings, and both him and Steiner were really about an integrated approach. And as you know, Waldorf education has physical exercise, they have dance and movement, and Steiner developed eurythmy, which is a system of movement for healing speech pathology and various other developmental disorders and injuries to the psyche. And both of them promoted a vegetarian diet, but both were very misunderstood. So what you have is the Self-Realization Fellowship system is encouraging people to eat vegetarian, which many of them do, thinking that's what Yogananda wanted. And that leads to a lot of health problems. And even when I was a kid, two of my parents' best friends died of brain cancer, and they were very high up in the Self-Realization Fellowship, but they were vegetarians. And now that I have the knowledge I do, I can look back and see they were really just suffering from the same problem that any vegetarian does that needs meat in their diet because they have genetic needs. And I've had to get involved in many family squabbles because Chek professionals that brought their kids to the Waldorf system would send their kids to school with meat in their lunch pail, and it would turn out to be a big battle, and the school board would get involved, and then I'd have to get involved. And in both cases, and in every case, I had to point out that both Yogananda and Steiner, interestingly, said almost exactly the same thing. They both thought a vegetarian diet was ideal to support spiritual development, but they both said almost exactly the same words. Steiner said, no man should become a vegetarian until it happens naturally. In other words, he felt as we evolve spiritually, that we would become more efficient inside, and that we wouldn't have the need for meat because of the changes that happen spiritually. And Yogananda didn't force vegetarian diets on people. He also felt it was just the better diet for spiritual evolution. And so I looked at all these systems around the world, and it became evident to me that there's just a lack of an understanding of a holistic, integrated approach to spiritual development. And as you know, Jason, we've got a lot of people that are very elite in the spiritual community and meditation and in mindfulness. But oftentimes, again, they're on these kind of quirky diets, and they've got these real fixed ideas, be it fruitarianism, vegetarianism. There's always some kind of an ism involved, and there's always this idea of, whatever's working for the guru, everybody else has to do it. And so I felt, looking at all this and working with so many people for so many years, what really was the point where I said, okay, now I've got to go from the research and development into the actual putting it down, was when COVID kicked off, and I saw how many people just did not have the capacity for rational thinking, problem solving. They didn't know how to look at the issues, gather the data to make an intelligent decision. They quickly fell into fear, sheep herd mentality. And as you know, it was some of the most elite, famous people in the world that fell into this trap. And some of them, who they were, shocked me. I mean, it really shocked me to the core. I won't name names because it's not my intention to pick on people, but it showed me that we have now reached the point through government and religious systems, indoctrination, and the taking over of the education systems by people like the World Economic Forum for so many years, and the globalists and the eugenicists, that we have now got a population of people that are still stuck in the child archetype. Ken Wilber, in some areas, says it's about 70% of the world population still in the child archetype. And that's a very, very dangerous situation to be in, because then you tend to follow blindly and you operate on sheep herd mentality, and you can easily become the target of tricksters. And I also have many memories of all my studies of Osho talking extensively about how India is just chock full of fake gurus, and that they're not in it to grow you, they're in it to get money and all this other stuff. And then we have the psychedelic revolution that's on now, and a lot of people getting lost and confused and mishandled and injured in that. So all these factors came together, and literally the day the pandemic started, I said to Angie and Penny, that's it, I've got to make Spirit Gym happen. Because I can't sit here with my knowledge and life experience and just watch the world go into a deeper meltdown without at least making an attempt to create a grassroots movement, because I've never seen anything change in the world from the government down. I've only seen things get worse. I've seen lots of promises, but no action. And I said, okay, now I have to do my very best to plant the seeds of consciousness and give people the skills for rational thinking and problem solving and legitimate spiritual growth. And I knew what I could do as an individual, because there's over 63,000 Chek professionals around the world, and you know a lot of them, and they're very, very intelligent people, and many of them came to me lost and confused as students and doing the same kind of stuff everybody else was doing, and living crooked and backwards, and pills and props and wraps and straps. And now they're in amazingly high positions all over the world. There's been over probably 40 to 50 books written by Chek professionals. Many of them have started food companies. Resorts, healing resorts, working in hospitals, in professional sports teams. So I saw that if you inspire people and you give them the tools to help themselves, then the soul naturally starts to grow. It's kind of like a plant. If you put it in soil that's not balanced and doesn't have enough nutrition in it, and you water it, it might grow, but it's very susceptible to dying or parasite infections, and it can't deal with the environment because it doesn't have the resources. It's like a child that needs to be nurtured by its parents, and if you don't nurture the child, you end up with a sick, broken child. So I felt that I had to put the soil together to allow anybody that really wants to grow and live their dreams and have some sovereignty and some freedom in their life and the tools to do effective problem solving, that it was really my duty to do that. And as you know, I'm getting older now. I'm 63. So I thought, I need to do this while I still have the energy to do it. It took a lot of energy.
Amazing. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, because I think it helps ground the process that you just spoke about, is that you have a very unique approach to discovering and integrating information.
Yeah.
I've seen your notebooks. I've seen your books. You utilize black pens, red pens, yellow highlighters. You have little sticky notes and notes in the margin, and you have kind of an interesting approach to using the table of contents and using the appendices and the index and stuff like that. So you have a way of kind of going through so much information. And I know there's a lot of people out there that want to work on their own, versions of what you've created, or they're trying to get through all of the information out there. And I was just kind of curious if you could just speak briefly about your process for looking at information, because there must have been thousands and thousands of books that were available to you or that you've read, millions that are available to you, but thousands that were probably put into this book, into this course, and to the Ultimate 15 book series. How do you go about figuring out what are the key pieces of information, and how do you go about making sure that it's not just in your head and actually in your heart or embodied in your life?
Well, it's a great question, and that could be a whole podcast, but I'll try to encapsulate my process. I think for me, because I really began my working career in the trades, I went to school for automotive and industrial repair in Canada to get my license to be a mechanic. And so I did that when I was 18. And it was a year of training in school. Then you have to spend 4 years under a journeyman to finally be approved as a journeyman. And the schooling was very practical. I mean, you have to study electronics. You got to study hydraulics, internal combustion. I used to rebuild engines, worked in Napa Auto Parts, worked with all the machining. So there's a fair bit to it. And what I found is, in my early years of training like that we would go through a course of instruction, and it was just innate to me to say, okay, what's the most important thing that the instructor said in this last hour of presentation? And so I would be taking notes, and then I would go through the syllabus, and anything that I thought I had to remember, because if I forgot it, I could damage something. I could screw up a cylinder head or cut too much off a flywheel, or adjust valves incorrectly and ruin an engine. And so because we had to get tested on all this stuff, I always held in my mind, what is the difference between theory and practice? And so all my life, I've always asked myself, as I'm studying, what's just a description or a theory of how this works? And what is it that I need to remember so that I can actually do what I have to do, regardless of whether we understand how or why it works? Like still to this day, for example, there's debates as to whether lightning comes from the sky down or the ground up.
Right.
But what you got to remember is that lightning can kill you, and you don't want to be in a swimming pool when it's around, So what I did is I said, okay, the first thing I've got to do is I've got to go practice what it is that's important, because I'm going to get tested on it. And then if I didn't understand the theory, I would go talk to instructors and say, okay, I don't understand this. How does this connect to this? And so I began this practice of orienting myself first towards what I had to know and practicing it. And then in my spare time, going back and trying to get clear on what the theory was that made sense. And if it didn't make sense, it was up to me to ask questions until it did make sense or figure it out myself. And so having worked in the automotive industry, the drilling industry, the logging industry, a bunch of different types of industries in my career, I found that this was what you had to do to be effective. And if you weren't effective, you wouldn't make a lot of money. You wouldn't be able to hold a job, And then when I got into sports massage therapy school, it was a lot deeper for me because now I was studying anatomy and physiology and psychology and acupuncture and meridian systems. So it was like I was into a whole different world. To go from electronics and mechanics and hydraulics to human anatomy, it was a big jump. So now my head was really overwhelmed. And, I'm not a guy, when I was younger, as you know, I didn't read my first book till I was 22. So I didn't really have this desire to read. It was very hard on my brain because I'm very right brain.
Steiner would have approved of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what Edmund Knighton said.
Oh, good job.
Yeah. And so what I did then is I also, because we had to get tested and everything, again, I applied the same model, but I found I had to devote a lot more time to reading and trying to digest and ask a lot more questions because I found that information was a lot harder for me to put the pieces together and get it to stick. So I continued my system, but then years and years ago, many people may or may not remember the business expert Brian Tracy. He's got a lot of videos and audio courses and stuff out there. But he did a course on learning, I believe it was. And he had a system called the OPIR system, OPIR, which stands for Overview, Preview, In-View, Review. And I did his course, and I thought, well, this is an excellent way to go about it, and it just turned out to be quite something that I was already doing naturally. But then I started making a habit of, before I bought a book, the first thing you do is you do the overview. So what is the cover description of the book, and does it sound relevant to what you're doing? Then I would look at the table of contents and see, okay, what are the chapters, and if there's other authors, who are they and how credible are they? Then I would look through the index. So, for example, for a lot of my studies, I'm interested in, right away I can tell how deep an author is by whatever they conceive the soul to be, the spirit to be, or God to be. So I go right to the index and I look up those words, and then I can tell within seconds if the book's of quality or if it's just somebody cut and pasting other people's stuff. Earlier in my career, what I would do is I would read all the references, and that takes a lot of work. Like a lot of these papers I would read would have 100, 150 references in them. And I would hire my son, Paul Jr. at the time, to go to the UCSD Medical Library. I set him up with a library card and a copy card so he could, I'd buy him like $500 worth of copy credits. And he would pull every single article in the papers I'd studied, and then I would read all those papers. And what you'd start seeing is, after you read like 10 papers on the knee, you'd find that all 10 authors were referring to one or two key experts. So then I would start studying their work, and then I would see who they referred to and who was. So over time, what you find is there's usually only 2 or 3 real movers and shakers in any field. And those are the people that are kind of the out-of-the-box thinkers, the great clinicians. And so I started getting in the habit of looking through reference lists to see whose name pops up as the most referenced. And then I would track their stuff down. And so it allowed me to find whose writings and whose teachings were worth looking into because they were good enough that hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people referred to them. So in a nutshell, what I did is I made a habit for myself, which takes a fair bit of discipline. This is where a lot of people are too lazy. As I'm reading a book, because you've seen lots of them, let's just say I'm reading a book on consciousness. And in that book, there are a series of different meditations you can do. So my rule is don't put the book back on the shelf until you have applied the teachings in the book long enough to get a sense of, do they work? Who would they be best for? How do they work? And what would they be best to apply to? And so that's the hard part. Lots of people can read books, but if you don't actually have the discipline, and that's, as you know, I get up very early in the morning, so I'm often doing different types of meditations and testing different approaches. And sometimes I'll test these things for months at a time until my soul says, okay, you've got the handle on this, you can move to the next thing. And so I always want to make sure that whenever I learn, as I'm studying, if I come across something that I think is really important, my first thought is, okay, which of my clients or patients does this apply to? I write their names down and I immediately see how I can apply it in clinical practice. If there's something that I can do in my own life, my own exercise therapy, my own, any way I can apply it to my personal life, I do it. And so that takes some time and some discipline to do, but ultimately what I found through years and years, I developed the whole Chek Institute this way, is a huge percentage of the stuff out there you find doesn't work very well at all or has very limited application. But the beauty of it is a lot of the ideas and the concepts were good, but because many of the authors had such narrow knowledge, like they may have only known the anatomy, but not understood the physiological correlations to a given stretch, exercise, mobilization, or practice. And I might be saying, well, yeah, that's a really good stretch for the abdomen, but it is also a great way to mobilize the liver. And so then I would say, now, what's the correlations between the liver and the psychology? So I would tie the pieces together that they didn't seem to be aware of and test that. So that's sort of an overview of the process. But I think the final thing I'll say is as I grew in my development in the relationship with my soul, I got to the point where I could actually talk to my soul and hear my soul talking to me, where I didn't have to ask yes, no answers and get energetic answers. But even when I was working with energy, I could just look at a bunch of books on the screen, like say books on consciousness, and there might be 100 of them. And I would just say to my soul, tell me when I'm near a book that you want me to read. And my soul would just direct my eyes. I would just let my eyes relax. And it would give me a big yes, that one. And so I just started letting my soul buy all the books. And I found that I hit bullseyes every time because my soul basically, well, long story, but it doesn't need to read the book to know what's in the book because it's reading the energetic vibration of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. I think it's important because, as you know, there's so much information out there in general for people to sift through. And to have a process to go about it, I think is very helpful and practical. But as we get into Spirit Gym, I actually think that this is quite relevant to Spirit Gym as well, because, there's over 150 videos, I'm imagining, in there. I haven't counted them, but there's a ton of videos. And these aren't short videos. These aren't 90-second Instagram videos. Some of them are 2 to 3 hours long. And I think one of the kind of the bad habits I think that students get into, and I tell my students this as well, is, it's not a race to get through it. I think a lot of times the impetus is to rip through the course and to watch every single video as fast as possible. But, I tell them, look, I don't care if you take one video and study it for the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. The key is not to, memorize all this information, but it's to turn it into wisdom and to apply it into your life. So I think that's a really, practical approach that is relevant for anyone taking Spirit Gym and relevant for anyone who is trying to sift through the mountains of information that are out there right now.
Hi, everybody. I know that you're all aware of the importance of vitamin C. There is a mountain of research on it, but not all C is created equally. I love Paleo Valley's Essential C Complex because it is the real deal, bioavailable, and I wanted you to hear right from Autumn Smith, founder of Paleo Valley, why their Essential C Complex is so unique and something you definitely want for your family and your children. Autumn, tell us about your Essential C Complex.
Well, I was shocked to learn as a holistic nutritionist that 90%, over 90% of the vitamin C on the market is derived from genetically modified corn and then it's processed with highly volatile acids. And so I knew I had to find a better way to get all of the powerful benefits of vitamin C. So what I did was I dove into the research and I found the 3 most vitamin C rich superfoods on the planet. That's unripe acerola cherry and camu camu and amla berry. And then I just packed them into capsules. And the benefits are amazing because you're not only getting vitamin C, but all of the other wonderful benefits that come from these amazing superfoods. So to get access to this complex, all you have to do is go to paleovalley.com and you can use the code CHEK15 at checkout. That's lowercase CHEK 15, and you can save 15% off.
To try Paleo Valley's Essential C Complex and save 15% on your purchase, go to paleovalley.com/CHEK15. That's PALEOVALLEY.com/CHEK15. No promo code is required. Enjoy. Yeah, I believe my last count was there's 75 lessons, and I think it's 82 running hours of what I call the Spirit Gym University, which the full members get access to. And then, as you know, some of the songs run as long as 4 hours, and they come with a presentation. Oftentimes, sometimes I do just Q&A and helping the students so that we don't get too deep into new stuff before they have time to apply it. And all the lessons have meditations, practical exercise, healing work. So they're, like you said, they're not things you should be rushing through because you're just going to, the ego is so desperate to be acknowledged and to be validated that it plays tricks on the mind, and it says, I know that. And I tell my students the most dangerous words you can tell me are I know that, because I know when you know without you even talking about it.
And that's why the greatest teachers say, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'm still as hungry of a learner as I was ever, and the more you know, the more you just realize, wow, these are I tell people knowledge is horizontal. It doesn't matter how much you get, the horizon just keeps moving.
As Karst would say, it's certainly an infinite game.
It's an infinite game. But the thing is, though, is the more you know, the more you study and learn, the more efficient you become at studying and learning. I'm a slow reader because I digest things and I make connections to it. And I process it, so it can take me, like Penny can read 5 books in the time I read one. But I think as we learn more and we go through the practice of metabolizing, assimilating, and integrating the information, we start to get a second sense for what is useful information, what isn't, what is a useful practice, and what isn't. And you kind of become just a more finely tuned instrument, really.
Yeah. I don't want to get stuck on this one thing because, like you said, we could talk about it for hours. But I will just say this: that I think as we move more and more into the age of AI and with this digital information being at our fingertips, it's more and more important, probably more important than ever.
Yes,
to have that sense of discernment of what is appropriate to study and to be efficient with it. With that being said, the problem with going and studying information, as I'm sure you're aware, is that algorithms are spoon feeding you information most of the time based on your already prevailing preferences.
Yeah.
So what happens is you go out there and you think you're studying more and more information, but ultimately you're getting more boxed and boxed into the same belief system because
Yeah.
it's mirroring back to you what your prevailing thoughts are. So, having this kind of heart-based approach, I think, is very, very needed.
Yeah, you get what's called confirmation bias. And like you said, the algorithms set you up. And ultimately, all they're trying to do is figure out what are you most likely to buy and what are you most likely to keep looking at, because they get paid by how many seconds you're on the screen. And so one of the habits that I have, and Penny can verify this for you, is I actually make a habit of studying viewpoints diametrically opposed to mine. Like if I'm studying vaccination, I want to know what the pro-vaccine people really believe. Like how did they get to that mindset? Where has vaccinations worked? When, why? My key questions are who, what, why, where, when, and how. If you don't have the discipline to answer those questions, you can leave yourself a gaping hole that can kill you, especially with that topic. So I think it's really important for an honest student to always look at both sides. And one of the things that really stuck with me when I was in school as a kid, we used to have debate classes. And I always remember one of the things that you had to do in a debate class is you always had to they would give you a topic and then you would have to switch sides of the table.
Yeah.
And so you had to debate with just as much intensity on the opposite perspective. And that stuck with me. That's one thing I did get from school that really, really helped me. And I grew up on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, so Canadian schools are a lot better than American schools. And, I've been in professional debates all over the world. And so it was always important for me to not discredit another person's viewpoint, but to try to understand what were the steps by which they came to the conclusions and what is missing based on what I believe is a more authentic or a more true or a more realistic perspective. And that, again, takes discipline because it's hard. Like Penny has walked into the room where I'm watching dogmatic Christian preachers talk about burning children in hell and all this terrible, nasty crap. And she'll look at me like, why on earth are you studying that stuff? And I have to understand the disease that I have to work with every day. I can't just say that I hate it and ignore it. So, I've studied standard dental literature and I've studied biological dentistry, to give you two juxtaposed opinions. I've studied standard medical approaches and allopathic approaches and chiropractic approaches and osteopathic approaches. And it takes a lot of time, but if you come to an opinion based on a combination of study and clinical practice, and my problem is almost every conclusion I've come up to in my career has gone against the mainstream. So every conference I've went to, wherever I'm going, I'm always going against the mainstream, not because I want to, because people don't think things through. Like, I can't tell you how many people write books on the science of exercise and biomechanics, and it's clear to me that they don't even know how to lift weights. And I've actually been in conferences where PhD professors in biomechanics are giving lectures, making hard, cold statements about how this has to happen or this won't happen or blah, blah, blah. And I raise my hand and say, you obviously have never lifted weights because what you're talking about is completely unrealistic and doesn't work in the real world, and human beings are not stick figures that you can model that easily on a computer. And I will even go up on stage and prove things to them. So, I think these are all very, very important things. I'll leave it at that because, like I said, this could be a whole podcast.
I think it's true. The word etymologically, if you take the root word of debate, it's like a percussive. It's actually like beating. But
yes.
The word argument actually is closer to what you're saying, which comes from argentum or silver, which means an argument is to polish the silver. We're getting down to the truth by polishing the silver. And this is the essence of holding the tension of the opposites. This is the essence of Arnold Mindell's conflict resolution, taking the other side, taking the other sides of yourself or in a relationship. This is when two or more are there, I will, or gather, I will be there. So ultimately, I think what you're saying is when you can hold this polarity, something new can emerge from that, something
Yes.
novel and creative.
Yeah.
And that's the key to not only individuating, but having novel thinking.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what Jung calls the transcendent function.
yeah. Well, I want to pull it back to Spirit Gym, but this was really, a beautiful segue. But I want to get down to the basics of what really is Spirit Gym. And I want to see if I could challenge you a little bit with a question, because when I was on Wall Street, one of the most important things that we had to do was my boss, Paul Tudor Jones, would say, describe to me your strategy in 1 to 2 sentences at a elementary reading level.
Yeah.
Because the simplicity is the ultimate sophistication of something that's complex. So could you first give us, in a short version, what's the essence of Spirit Gym and who's it for? And then maybe expand on it with a little bit deeper background on it.
Well, first of all, Spirit Gym's for everybody that's old enough to understand how to read, write, and has a genuine interest in understanding who they are and becoming the best version of themselves. So you could be. I think I got a 17-year-old in Spirit Gym. So you could come in as a high school student and comprehend it and work with it. The other question was, what is Spirit Gym?
Yeah, who is it for and what is it?
Spirit Gym is a signifier for the place in which we all enact our story. And through the trials and tribulations of playing the roles that we play, come to realize not only who we are, but who we aren't. And not only what we want, but what we don't want. And ultimately, with the help of someone that has the skill, learn that we can edit our story and recreate ourselves to be more in line with our heart's intentions.
Amazing.
So, I think we can get through this a little more later, but if you ask yourself, who am I without my story? Well, that's an important question to ask. And then, do I like the role that I'm playing, or am I being a victim and blaming my role on other people, and just copping out on my own creativity? And I think once you realize that life itself is a story that is the container for a myriad of stories, as many stories as you can count, right? Everything's a story. Ibn al-Arabi basically says everything is an icon, a symbol that points to something beyond itself, right? I look like I'm looking at Jason right now, but I'm looking at an icon for who Jason really is. Like, when I see that icon in my presence, it's my key to pay attention to the spirit that's animating it, because that's who Jason really is. Because I've seen Jason a lot heavier than he is now. I've seen him skinnier than he is now. I've seen him stronger than he is now. I've seen him weaker than he is now. I've seen him happier than I've seen him sadder than he is now. But every one of those times, the body that I recognized as Jason showed up. So the icon showed up. But to really know Jason, I had to penetrate down to the essence of who it is that I am relating to. And then I feel like I get to know Jason. So really, it's what I would say Jason's story turns out to be what I consider to be my friend and the storyteller. But Jason's body is really telling me a lot about how that story is playing out in his life, as an example.
So from the perspective of Spirit Gym, what's the story of why we're here? How does Spirit Gym tackle what our role here is on Earth? What's the underlying myth of why we're here?
Well, it's a these are simple but very profound questions, right? So the question is, can I give you the short answer?
Well, we're in Spirit Gym, so I don't expect anything less.
Yeah, and really, when you say, okay, well, what is a gym for? A gym is a place you go with the intention to grow or develop more skill, isn't it? And to do it, you meet resistance. If you're a martial artist and you go to a dojo, you meet the resistance of an opponent. And you have a master there who will provide more resistance if you need it, because there's not people strong enough in the group to give you the resistance that you need. So we grow strength, we grow focus, we grow skill, we grow intelligence, we grow endurance, we grow flexibility, we grow agility, adaptability, coordination, and balance. Every one of those has a psychological correlate, right? If you're not flexible in the world, then the world will break you. You'll be rigid. If you're not strong, the world will crush you. If you're not intelligent enough to make good decisions, you'll be a statistic. So when I ask myself the question, what is the ultimate source from which everything comes? Well, the word that we mostly use is God. And if I say, okay, then if God is the source of it all, then it must be God telling the story of life. And if God is the source of it all, then it must be God that's taking all the roles in the story. And if God is that for which there is no other, then God cannot know itself, because you cannot know yourself without a relationship. This is well proven in psychology. So when I looked deeply into what was really going on in the life process, I came to the realization that God is exploring itself through relationship by dreaming itself into existence, and through the trials and tribulations of love is coming to realize what it is, what isn't, and what its potentials are. And I could see that humanity is very aware of the necessary growth and development for gyms to train soldiers and classrooms to train business people and gyms to train athletes. But I saw very little understanding of the gym to train us spiritually, to develop our psyche, our deeper sense of who we are, why we're here, and how to access our soul to really get a heartfelt sense of what is our innate natural genius and how do we grow that and ultimately have that sense of meaning and fulfillment. And I'm fortunate because I figured that out for myself when I was 21, so I know what it feels like to be in your river. I've watched many people die on the vine and go through multiple careers in their life because they did what they thought they had to do to make money, but they didn't follow their heart and stick to something that they were passionate about. And as you've heard me say, when you do what you love to do every day, you make love every day, and that's sustainable. But if you do what you think you got to do to make a living, then you're telling yourself a story that's ultimately not sustainable, because all you're doing every day is making money and you're not making love, and money won't give you love. Money cannot buy love. So in a nutshell, Spirit Gym is where we face the mystery and realize that because God is an ultimate mystery, the only thing we know for sure is everything that God has dreamed into existence, which is life itself. And because God is the source of the story, is the storyteller, and we are acting that role, to wake up means to accept responsibility for the fact that the qualities that are inherent in God are inherent in humanity. Our creativity can only be there because God is creative. Our intelligence can only be there because God is intelligence. Our capacity to love can only be there because God is ultimately loving. Our capacity to destroy can only be there because God uses destruction as part of a creative process. So, as a therapist and as a consciousness researcher, a psychonaut, a person who's got a deep interest in and passion for understanding the deep mysteries of life, I came to the conclusion that we are all in a spirit gem, but many of us do not know it. And because of that, we're not getting any better results in our personal, professional, and spiritual growth than an athlete would get in a gym if they didn't realize they were in a gym and therefore didn't know how to use the beautiful tools all around them, you know?
Yeah.
So Spirit Gym's really me saying, hey, let's take the concept of the gym and let me put the tools in there that ultimately you need for physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual growth. And let me show you how to determine where you need to focus based on your profile, based on your story and your symptoms and what your dream is. And then we can take those things and then say, okay, what's the most important thing to work on? And that's one of the benefits is, you know, with my life experience, I can talk to a student and in a few minutes, listen to their story and say, you know, yeah, you've got a bunch of negative thoughts and suicidal thoughts and you hate God and you want to die. But how about if we start getting you to bed on time, drinking some good water and eating some clean food? And oftentimes 2 weeks later, they're a completely different person. But if they would have gone to see a psychiatrist, the same behaviors and practices that led to the problem would have just been getting drugged. And now they'd be even more toxic and in more trouble because they're not addressing the story and the behaviors and the beliefs that led to that lack of freedom. So really, that's what Spirit Gym's all about. It's really, where do we go to contribute to being a co-creator in God's dream? Because every step we go in realizing ourselves, we have to take God with us because it's God that's living inside of us, breathing us, and pretending to be somebody else.
Yeah. You know, you brought up an interesting point there about the importance of mystery.
Yes.
You know, if you study or you practice any of the mystical variations of any of the world religions or of shamanism, it's becomes quite evident that the concept of understanding and accepting and surrendering to the mystery of God and in the mystery of the universe is an important key component to your own growth and development. So how does Spirit Gym approach this concept of the mystery and how to work with that?
Well, you know, the first principle when we get to the principles is zero, right? And ultimately, zero is not a number, it's a symbol. And a symbol always points beyond itself. So when you say, well, what is zero? Zero is absolutely no thing. If you have zero in your account, there's nothing in there, which means there's space to hold anything you want to put in there. And because zero has no border, barrier, or definition, anything that exists within the womb of the emptiness of zero. So whenever you say God is, or God wants, or God demands, you now have taken God from its authentic position as source into a concrete depiction, and you now have an icon. And it's terribly amusing to me that Christianity, for example, is very against idol worship and wiped out many, many cultures and destroyed idols, and so did Islam. And, there's been religious wars all over the world, but one of the first things any emperor or any ruler or king or tyrant does is wipe out all the icons that people use to deify their god, because that's the first thing you got to do to change the culture's belief system, is get rid of all their icons. So paradoxically, religions are full of icons that concretize God as this or that, and their scriptures are full of rules and regulations of God, what God wants from you, expects from you, and what God will do to you if you don't follow the rules, which means you don't have God at all. Now what you've got is a set of beliefs that are concretized, and whenever you have a belief, you're not supposed to ask questions, or you're challenging the belief system, which means you don't believe in the religion, which means you're either a heretic, which can get you killed, or today it'll get you censored and maybe put in jail, but you still aren't worshiping God, you're worshiping an idea. So for me, because I have encountered the mystery very deeply in my life many, many times, as you have, you come to the realization that if we all agree that the highest way to describe God is unconditional love, that there are no conditions in God as God, and therefore the closest you can get to God is the experience of love. And so ultimately, we can't use nouns to describe God, or we're making a very dangerous mistake. We can only use the verb of love. And love takes a myriad of forms, from, the love of a friend, to the love of nature, to the love of a sport, to the love of photography, to the love of growing and developing yourself. So in Spirit Gym, I make it clear that zero is the first principle, and you cannot concretize zero as this or as that. You can only work on principles, and the principles are really the principles by which you are most likely to experience the truth and the potential of yourself, because these principles show up repeatedly, and you have to ask yourself, for example, why is the golden rule not forgotten by people for thousands of years since Confucius first wrote it down? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because we turn out to find out that it's true. You don't need a scientific validation. Just go punch somebody in the face and watch what happens. Go hug somebody and they're likely to hug you back. So what you find is that principles that last because they have empirical value. They have down in the ditch, hard reality value. And in Spirit Gym, for me, what's most important is not that you believe my ideas of what God is, but that you come to your own relationship through your own exploration. Because then if your God is scary, you know who wrote the story. If your God is loving, you know who wrote the story. And really, for me, I think it's important for us all to grow up and have a mature relationship with God. And that requires that you're brave enough to face the mystery every day. Otherwise, you become a child that's always waiting for Santa Claus to come down the chimney and make your life easier, or the tooth fairy to put money under your pillow. But you get to the point where you have children and adult responsibilities, and you find out, Santa Claus just ain't showing up. and I don't have any more teeth to give away. So you have to come to the reality that it's either somebody else's fault, or you've got to really rethink your relationship with Source, because your relationship with what we are calling God or Source actually turns out to have the most impact on every other belief you have, and a knock-on effect.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting you brought up the religion, because, I'm sitting here reflecting on the fact that clearly there has been a lot of distortions of the original teachings of many of these religions, and they have been expressed in ways that maybe are less than optimal throughout the world over time. But yet here we are thousands of years later with these things still alive. So there's clearly value in them. The problem might be in how they're interpreted or enacted. But my question is more about how this relates to Spirit Gym. So, in the fact that, do you have to be a spiritual person to join Spirit Gym? Can you be an atheist or agnostic? Do you need to be a religious person to be in Spirit Gym? And maybe even on the opposite side, if you are a religious person, uh, do you fit in Spirit Gym? And you know, this might be too many questions at once, but how do you see religion evolving in the context of Spirit Gym over time and creating new possibilities into the future?
Well, that's a very good question. The first step for me is to say, how do religions get started, right? We know Islam comes from Muhammad. We know Christianity is based on the story of Jesus. We know Judaism has its roots. Taoism has its roots. I mean, we can study the founders of Buddhism, Gautama, Siddhartha, the Buddha. But all religions start off as the experiences of the founder, and those ideas turned out to be, in every single case, what circumstances led to an enlightenment experience or a union experience with God and a sense of deep realization that you now understood what life was all about. And that becomes a set of practices that are then canonized. And a dogma, the actual function of a dogma is to create a set of reliable practices and principles based on the founder's experience. But over time, you get people involved and you get political infighting. And whenever the founder of a religion dies, then, as the old saying, when mom and dad are away, the kids will play. And so next thing you know, you start seeing it going through all sorts of changes, and then it becomes a source of income, a corporation, and a source of power and control over people, and then it becomes politicized. So the word religion, as you know, means to link back or to connect to God, to source. Yoga means union, which is the same thing. Yoga is not a religion, technically, it's a philosophy. But the key point that I'm driving is every one of the founders of the religions had the experience of linking back to an experience that was beyond the mind's ability to contain. A real religious experience will literally blow a person's mind. The mind can only memorize ideas, concepts, practices, and principles, but it can't contain the numinous. It can't contain the inexplicable. It can't contain the infinite. It cannot contain the mystery. In fact, by definition, a mystery is something that the mind cannot explain, or it wouldn't be called a mystery. So it doesn't matter if you're a religious person or not, because you can be a staunch atheist, but within each of us is a soul or consciousness, or we wouldn't be conscious people. And ultimately, in every single one of us, there's a yearning that's very much like the yearning a child has if it's orphaned, and it wants to inherently know, who's my mommy? Who's my daddy? Where did I come from? So at the level of the soul has constantly got this background urge to answer the deep question, who am I? What am I? How did I get here? And so it doesn't really matter if you're a religious person or not, or you're a spiritual person or not, because those are just signifiers for ways of relating. But at the core of all of it, we all have a soul that wants to know who's my mommy and who's my daddy. And so Spirit Gym's really where I invite everyone to be honest about answering those questions, and I give you a set of tools to go about it in a stepwise manner, either through a rational, logical approach, which is sometimes called the right-hand path, or the positiva path, which means you keep asking questions and gaining more knowledge till all of a sudden a picture emerges and you go, oh my God, I couldn't be here without the entire universe being involved. Or you take the left-hand path, which is classically Eastern, it's called the Negativa path, where you sit in caves and meditate for as long as it takes to empty your mind. And when there's nothing in your mind, all of a sudden an image appears, which is sometimes called your original face before you were born. And you go, oh my God. And you realize that you are one with all that is. And all that is still not all that is, because all that is coming from something that paradoxically isn't. In Zen, the Zen masters use koans, and a koan is a question or a riddle that cannot possibly be answered by the rational mind. In fact, they're designed to kill the rational mind, to disable it. For example, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Now, the rational mind will come up with all sorts of fancy tricks to try to describe that. You'll go to the Zen master, and the sound of one hand clapping is the sound of your hand moving at 63 miles an hour, hitting air molecules, and you can't hear it, but a mouse can. And the Zen master will say, get the fuck out of my office. And you quit thinking and start doing the real work.
It sounds like one hand closing the door behind you.
Yeah, that's the other hand, right? The one hand that you don't hear clapping is followed by the hand pushing you out of the office to quit all the mental masturbation. Now, the thing is, some people have taken 30 years to finally crack a koan, and some can do it very quickly. I interviewed Dr. Oliver's partner. I forgot her name, Nancy, I believe it is. She's a Zen Roshi. And she's cracked, countless koans, but she's one of these people who's got the right stuff to deal with a paradox. So a koan is really a paradox, right? What the sound of one hand clapping, that's a paradox. What did your face look like before you were born?
Yeah.
Right? So ultimately, what I'm really trying to say is that Spirit Gym is set up so that you don't have to have a belief system. You don't need to be religious. If you have the interest in exploring who you are and how you got here and what it is that you can do that is most likely to make life meaningful and fulfilling, then the tools are there for you to do that. You just have to have the discipline to do the work that it takes to do that. And if you don't, it wouldn't mean much to you anyhow. Like if anyone can be an Olympic gold medalist, it would mean nothing to be one. But the people that are willing to do the work are few. And even if you have a lot of people willing to do the work, not everybody has the gifts of being an Olympic weightlifter or a hockey player. But we all actually have the gifts of figuring out who we are, what we are, and why we're here. And so Spirit Gym is really an invitation to anybody to come engage the principles, the practices, and use the tools to answer the deep questions that are beyond ideology, philosophy, or religion, because they're inherent in the human psyche or soul.
Paul, most of the people who are interested in this program probably fall interested in one of three categories: their health, their relationships, or we might say wealth or purpose, or, what do I do with my life? What's my karma? So, these seem to be the biggest challenges that people are facing, is like some kind of, body challenge or mental emotional challenge, relational challenge, or deeper questions around why are we here and how do I make an impact? And, so how does Spirit Gym go about addressing these and solving them for the members?
Well, I always start with a simple formula, which you're very familiar with: 1, 2, 3, 4. First and foremost, if you're facing a challenge, you have to get clear on what your dream goal or objective is, or you don't really know how to go about resolving the challenge, because there's many different ways to resolve a challenge. For example, if you have a back problem, like a disc injury, you could have surgery, which could have positive outcomes or negative outcomes, because the surgery itself is another injury. You could try manual therapy. That could be effective. You could look at the psychological correlates of the problem and say, okay, what are the psychological correlations to back pain, for which there are many? You could also look at it from an internal perspective and say, okay, is there a relationship between key glands and organs that show up as back pain and could contribute to the pathology that I have? You could then look at the biochemical relationships and say, are there biochemical relationships? So once I know what your dream is, for example, if you're a professional athlete and the type of injury you have has a poor recovery rate with surgery, I'm going to look at your career and say, okay, well, how far into your career are you? And I'm going to ask you, how many more years would you like to be a professional athlete and perform well? And let's say you're in your third year and the answer is, I'd like to perform well for the next 8 years, which would be kind of the shelf life of most professional athletes, call it 35 to 40. Then I'm going to say, we don't want to go the surgical route unless we absolutely have to. We can try the manual therapy route. We can try the corrective therapy route. But then I'm going to ask you, how many times have you had this kind of back problem? And the answer is often 3, 4, 5, 6. So then I'm going to say, okay, we need to not only do the corrective exercise and the related mechanical stuff, but we got to look into the lifestyle factors and the beliefs and the behaviors and the subtle energetic factors that also compound to create this problem. So whenever someone comes into Spirit Gym with any of the types of situations you've mentioned, the first thing we've got to do is get clear on what the dream, goal, or objective is, because that tells you a lot about, A, how quickly do we need to resolve this based on what your circumstances are, B, how chronic of a problem it is, and therefore deeply rooted. And the more chronic and deeply rooted is, the more we have to look at the psychological and the behavioral factors of it. So 2, 1 is, what is your one love? What do you love enough to change for, to learn for, and to grow for? And if you don't know what your dream, goal, or objective is, then we always have to look at what your nightmare is, because that's where most of your life force energy is trapped. So if we can resolve the nightmare, for example, the most common nightmare I run into as a therapist is people are financially in trouble. And that always creates a huge amount of stress. So many times, for example, I've had to refer people to debt counselors to teach them how to manage debt and how to do things like credit card consolidation. And it's amazing. I've had people with chronic low back pain that, after working with a debt counselor for a month or two, even though they had mechanical reasons for their back pain, ended up having such a relief just knowing that they now could manage their finances that they reported that they didn't have back pain anymore.
They have the weight off their back.
They literally have the monkey off their back.
Yeah.
And so if you don't know what your dream, goal, or objective is, then it's best to focus on your nightmare. 2 is, where are you out of balance? And so when I look at that, I'm always looking at the 3 factors that are feminine, yin, and the 3 factors that are yang, because yin and yang, as you know, are the 2 creative energies that make everything in the created universe. So I have to look at the feminine principles, nutrition, hydration, sleep, and the masculine principles, breathing, thinking, and movement, and say, okay, what's your dream, and how does the way you're managing nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement orient you towards or put you at cross current to your stated dream, goal, or objective, which is almost always an educational issue or a habitual issue, such as addiction, that's getting in the way. And if there's an addiction, we have to say, well, why do you have the addiction? Because ultimately, I find all our addictions are attempts to get safe love. So there's almost always a trauma involved. Then 3, now that we know where you're out of balance and we know what your dream is, we have to get ready to make some effective choices. So there's only 3 choices you can make in relationship to any person, place, or thing. The optimal, which is best for you and everybody involved. The suboptimal, which is best for your need for instant gratification, but almost always somehow subverts the flow of energy through you and the dream team. Or to do nothing. Do nothing can mean don't make a decision until you've gathered enough information to make an intelligent decision. Do nothing in a relationship conflict means take a time out and don't resolve trying to negotiate or navigate the conflict till you can stay connected at the heart. And the negative aspect of doing nothing is to be apathetic, which means to not care. And so if we have a not I don't care attitude, then we have to start looking into archetypes such as the victim, the saboteur, the prostitute, the wounded child derivations. But the key point is, first, we have to have a dream. Second, we have to identify where the imbalances are. Then we have to design a plan based on 4 doctors. So number 4 is, what's happy making for you? How much movement and what type do you need to get yourself healthy and then live your dream? What's the right diet for your individual needs at this time? And how much rest do you need in order to heal yourself and keep your body and your mind healthy? And can we put some introspection in there so that you can take some time to witness how your choices are playing out in your life and grow spiritually from the opportunity? Because pain, I call, as you know, pain the pain teacher. Pain only shows up in our lives when we're not paying attention to how we're creating and how we're managing our use of energy, resources, etc. So the approach for everybody that I work with is always the same, because you can't actually solve a problem effectively without having a clear sense of why you're doing it, without knowing what imbalances led to the problem, without doing an assessment and then categorizing your approach into those 4 key factors. Because if you have a good movement plan and you have a good diet plan and you're getting enough rest, but you don't have any sense of what is happy making for you, you'll just be a fit person that can't ever figure out how to get excited about life, because there's nothing that excites you. So now, without going through all of them, any one of those 4 doctors left without attention leaves a big enough hole in a living philosophy that the pain teacher's guaranteed to show up. So just to be crystal clear, no matter who you are or what your reason for being in Spirit Gym, there is going to be a 1, 2, 3, 4 approach, because we're all human. We all have relationships. We all have bodies to care for. We all have lives to live, and we all have stories that we're either consciously creating or unconsciously playing the victim to, and you cannot escape those 4 key principles.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It just reminds me of something I've been reflecting on lately. I'm curious what you think about this. It seems to me that the most practical and functional way to change is to work on the body, right? I mean, to think of how are we going to have healthy thoughts without having a healthy diet, right? Or the correct breathing, for example. It seems pretty clear. And then once we get our mind clear, then we can manage our emotions. And then once those are clear, we can develop a spiritual relationship. But there is also the other side of the coin when, for example, people have practice mental visualizations that cures cancer, or have psychedelic, ceremonial, shamanic type experiences that then have a reorientation of the lower. So in some ways, it seems like a bottom up and a top down approach. Can you talk about that a little bit in terms of those various factors?
Yeah, it's generally because the body stuff is really quite practical and straightforward. We all have to drink water, and it needs to be quality water. We all have to get sleep. We all have to get movement. We all have to breathe, right? So the body's an easy place to start, because those are undeniable factors. Anyone that tries to convince me they don't need to breathe, I just cover their mouth and nose for a minute and they get clear. So because working at the emotional, mental, and spiritual level almost always guarantees you're going to come face to face with a conflict within your own belief system, that tends to be more challenging for people than body problems. Because what we believe is more closely linked to our sense of identity, who our people are, and our sense of belonging than our body. You can be part of a Christian church, whether you're fat, skinny, sick, or healthy. But if you don't believe Jesus is the only begotten Savior, you'll get kicked out of the group. So if part of your healing actually has something to do with the way you're living out your beliefs from Christianity, and I try to start there, you're not likely to have the energy to deal with the level of mental, emotional, and psychic gymnastics you're going to have to go through to ultimately resolve that conflict, because that goes right to the life process archetypes. Are you a child? Are you a warrior? Are you in the king, queen, or are you a wise man or a wise woman? And most people, about 70% of the world population, still in the child archetype. So in a case like that, it's far better to start with their body, because I can work on their body without challenging the belief system in most instances. The problem becomes when the challenges of the body are the side effect of the belief system. And the percentage of people that have addictions is very, very high. Some experts say between 80 and 90% of people have an addiction to something. So where it gets tricky for me as a therapist is when healing the body requires a confrontation with the beliefs and the behaviors that keep the body in a state of disablement. So sometimes you have to make a tough decision. And what I do in a case like that is I start with what I call using free energy. So before I start addressing beliefs or addictions, I let my students and my clients know, look, if you don't have the discipline to take advantage of the healing practices and forces in nature that are free, you aren't going to have the discipline or the strength to deal with the actual causes of how you keep creating this. So I will tell people, look, you can walk. And if a person can walk, I want you to walk for 30 to 60 minutes a day and just breathe fresh air and try to time your steps to your breathing rhythm. And I'll give them very simple practice, and you can sleep. It's free. Make sure you're getting enough sleep.
Cold shower, ground, put your feet on the earth.
Yeah, so I start with things that are free. And that way they can learn how much better they can feel without spending money. And for me, as a therapist, I have to be realistic. And as a teacher, if you don't have the discipline to spend the time each day to get the free therapy that Mother Nature is offering you, you aren't going to have the discipline to do the real work. And sometimes the reality of it is, like drug addicts, we have to let people hit bottom so that they're at a point where they're inspired to actually face the dragon. And that sometimes takes some tough love. Like there are people I've had as patients and as clients that were too invested in their story to accept responsibility for the fact that they're creating their pain themselves and their problems themselves. And no matter what free energy technologies I gave them, they simply wouldn't do them because they keep making excuses, which is classic eternal child behavior. They're wanting someone to fix them, to rescue them, and to do the work for them, which never works. It just makes you codependent on somebody else. And that's what, children love mommy and daddy figures. And that's why religion is so popular. There's always a mommy and a daddy figure. That's why isms are so popular. They want to belong to a group, like veganism. That's my family, and that's my belief system. And whoever the leaders of the movement are, they're my surrogate mommy and daddy. So sometimes you have to let pain be the great motivator. Now, you mentioned plant medicines or psychedelics. Sometimes I find that you can use a carefully constructed plant medicine ceremony to open people to what is beyond the containment of their own mental structure.
Yeah.
And then they can have their own religious experience or spiritual experience that can actually do years and years worth of work for me or a psychologist And now they come to a realization of what they're creating in their body, what they've created in their mind, where they've fallen into the cracks of a belief system. Then I already have something to work with. But it might take years and years of Tai Chi, Qigong, or meditation to have an experience you can get in one shamanic ceremony. So, I mean, that's one of the benefits of having a mentor with as much life experience and skill as someone like me, because I know, what the possibilities are, what the pathways are, what's safe, what's not safe, when to use this tool, when not to use this tool. And that's really what Spirit Gym does. It provides me and other mentors like you and others that come, Edmund Knighton and many of the various experts that will be coming in, so that you can actually ask people that have already walked that trail of tears and they know how to handle it. And then you have a community of people to support you that aren't going to bullshit you. They're not going to reinforce your dogma. They're going to call you on your game out of love, and they're going to point you in the right direction. And most of them will have already walked their own trail of tears or be on their trail to healing. And I think that's very important because we're social creatures. There's only rare individuals that can handle a real healing journey alone.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up this concept of community because, when I went out to design my course, and I'm curious if you feel this way, I thought I was making a digital course with a community as sort of a side gig, right? It was supplemental. But what I realized was that I was actually creating a community, and the course and the information was supplemental and supportive of the community. That in this day and age, what people are really craving is a community of people that are like-minded, that want to come together and work together. And I think I'm sure you've seen this a million times. So many people, more so than not, come into something of this intensity and don't make it through the first week or two, and then you never see them again.
Right.
And the accountability that comes from being in a community and seeing other people go through these kinds of same situations. And, I'm sure all the time somebody brings a question up in the community, and it's the same thing that everybody else is experiencing. They're just the one that is more vulnerable or brave enough to ask the question, or, more pain to bring it forward. But I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about the community, because I think, being in Spirit Gym and knowing all of the material that you put out there, it seems to me as invaluable as all of the content is. Actually, the community is key.
Yeah. Here's the analogy that came to me while you were talking. Think of the course lessons as the fuel for the fire that is the center in which the community circles.
Mm-hmm.
We all love to sit around campfires. It's very primal in us. And we like the fire because it keeps us warm and it gives us light, and light helps you be safe with predators. So when I developed Spirit Gym, I asked myself, after all these years of guiding people through life challenges, what are the sources of illumination that are the most common that they're going to need? And that's what I'm going to build the fire out of. And then we're going to gather around and we're going to share our hearts and our souls. And inevitably someone's going to say, Paul, I have such and such a problem. I'm not in love with my spouse anymore. I really don't want to be in the relationship. It's been 20 years. I've got 2 kids. That's a tough situation to be in. And so then I say, okay, look, what we need to do is ask everybody in the group, how many of you are in the same situation right now? And inevitably 10, 12, 15 hands go up. So first of all, realize what you're going through is a normal part of life, and you're not alone. Second of all, now we look at the fire, and I say, you see that log right there that's glowing beautiful and red and yellow? That's called getting clear on what your values are and what your dream is for yourself and what your dream is for your partnership. And that log right next to it, that's called a must-have, must-not-have list. And when you look into the light that comes from the process of exploring those key things that are inherent to getting clear on what you really want in your relationship, you will evolve. So the lessons are the fire and the logs that make the light, and the people around it are the ones that are looking into the light to try to gain the clarity that they can't see in the darkness. And the actual practice of doing the lessons is the illumination process.
Yeah. So there's so much support here with this community, because you're meeting once a week, sometimes 3 or 4 hours, and people are, just to go over the practical components of it, they're on Zoom live with you
Yeah.
once a week with the other members of the community. And you're bringing them, you're stoking that fire, and then you're allowing them to share their experiences. And really, probably the most valuable is have live Q&A and ask you live coaching questions.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
And also, as you know, all the lessons and all the sanghas, we call them sanghas in Spirit Gym, which is a community gathering with the intention of being together and growing together. A lot of people can't make it because I've got members from all over the world. I don't know how many members we have. Last time I looked, it was like 235 or something. But they're all recorded, and you have forums so you can write questions in. You can talk to all the other members of the community. You can get support from people that have already walked that trail of tears. So you can always get your questions answered, and we rotate the call times so that it's favorable for people in different regions of the world at different calls, so that nobody sort of gets the short end of the stick. Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I imagine you know that magnesium is one of the minerals that people in North America are the most deficient in, but it's an extremely important mineral to have in your diet regularly. And believe it or not, Bioptimizers has improved what was already well known to be the best magnesium formula out there, called Magnesium Breakthrough. So I've got Wade Lightheart with me to explain what it is they've done to improve this already excellent formula. Wade, what is new about your new Mag Breakthrough formula?
Well, it's called sucrosomial magnesium. So we have 7 different types of magnesium in Magnesium Breakthrough because they're uptaken by different parts of the body. But a new type of magnesium has been created called sucrosomial. And what it shows in the research in science is that it's actually even more absorbable by the body, particularly inside of the brain, which is a big aspect to enhance neurotransmitter formation, as well as ensuring the rest and relax response in the nervous system that a lot of people will take magnesium for. They find it, clocks them down, helps them sleep better, allows for the relaxation of striated and smooth muscle tissue in the body, which creates an energetic relief. And so when we added sucrosomial, we were able to demonstrate inside our lab facility that we were able to get better improvements. Of course, we have a partnership with the Birch International University. We have some patents we're working on, which will kind of relay some of these things. But sucrosomial was a no-brainer when we added to the formula, improved the results or improved the uptake. And the reports back from our testing team were like, wow, we get more results with less caps. And that's always the goal for our company.
That's excellent. I love it. I always say, and people have probably heard me say it before, I just am so amazed how you guys are constantly and always improving and working your best to not only make better products for us, but it doesn't seem to me that it gets more expensive as you make them better. So that's a real gift to the world. Thank you.
And now Bioptimizer's Magnesium Breakthrough is available in a delicious flavored drink powder. It's packed with all 8 forms of magnesium, sweetened with Katem fruit extract that is 3,000 times sweeter than sucrose but does not spike glucose when metabolized, and made with organic flavors and colors. Choose from fruit punch flavor, raspberry lemonade, banana mango, or add your own choice to the unflavored options. To try Magnesium Breakthrough drink, go to bioptimizers.com/living4D and use the promo code PAUL10 for 10% off your first order. That's bioptimizers.com/living, the number 4, the letter D, and the promo code is PAUL10.
Yeah, and there's huge value in the online community. There's huge value in the weekly sanghas, in the recordings, and of course, the course material. And, for anyone who's listening to this that is a Chek professional or anywhere in the holistic health field, or even outside of that, my personal opinion is that by dedicating yourself to this course, maybe one of your objections might be, I can't afford it or something like that, even though it's very modestly priced. But my personal opinion is that by actually going through this process, through the connections you will make, the networking that you can do, the opportunity to ask Paul questions, the ability to up-level your game through all of the content, that before you even got through this course, you'd have enough content and information and wisdom to raise your rates enough that would actually pay for the course and then some. And I think that's one of the key mistakes people don't make is, the most important thing you can do is invest in yourself. Spirit Gym is an absolute amazing investment in yourself. And you have to get over the scarcity mindset that I don't have enough to pay for and focus on what you will be able to charge, how you'll be able to live, the kind of connections and networks and resources that you'll have by actually investing in yourself and going through this. I have no doubt that it will pay off in spades. I've already seen it in many
Well,
of your
not only
students.
that, I learned a long time ago as a therapist that if you don't charge a fair fee for your service, for your education, for the knowledge and skill you bring, people don't respect you, and they don't respect themselves. I actually find that the students that are usually the better ones are the ones that have to really take their investment seriously, because it inspires them to get their shit together and participate more fully in their life. And, there's plenty of support for even business type stuff in the course. I mean, I've been running businesses my whole career. I know how they go well and how they don't go well. And I've made all the mistakes that I can help you not make. And so, yeah, I think we need to look at things not as an expense, but as an investment. And there's no better investment than yourself, because it doesn't matter if you've got lots of money in gold or real estate or stocks, but you feel like shit and you're having a hard time, really enjoying your life. And that's why you created the Abundance Archetype program, is to help people really get clear on what abundance really is. And I think that these are all very, very important concepts. And I was also going to say that we have created a membership tier now. So there's different levels of membership. For example, now you can become a member and only do the sanghas and not have to buy all the lessons, which is a great way to enter and get a lot of help without the time and expense that the more serious students will put into the lessons.
Yeah. I'm curious what you think about this too, before we move on, in terms of the paying for things and this kind of idea of maybe a spiritual reciprocity. One of the things that I tell my students all the time is, I know how much work I put into my course, and I know how much work you put into your course. You put in years and years of work, if not 40 years worth of life experience consolidated into this experience. And what people don't realize is that if they don't actually take your course seriously, if they don't actually pay you a fair fee for what you've put out there, why should they expect ever to be treated fairly or to be paid in return? So many students, in some ways, it's not even fair or right to them to not charge them what is reciprocal to you for your time, because basically you're setting them up for a situation where spiritually and karmically that they will never be taken seriously. They'll start attracting clients that will say, "Oh, I can't pay, I can't do this, I can't do that. Can you lower your fees?" And they'll have clients that won't take it seriously. So it's very important out there for anyone who's listening to engage fully, be impeccable with your word, come in and do it, commit to it, take it seriously, and offer what's fair for the time, which you're not even coming close to the amount of value that Paul has put into this course. But he's come up with a price that is very reasonable, and to commit to that, because if you don't commit to that, you should never be expected that in your own practice you'll ever get to the dreams and goals and even financial objectives that you ever
Well, also,
want to
there's a
have.
couple of things I'll add to that. I say to people like that, look at what you have committed your investments into? Like, how much money are you spending on stuff that's not actually helping you grow? It's not helping you heal. It's not helping you learn to think and solve problems. It's not deepening your relationship with yourself or with God or source. So you have to say, what are you investing in, and what's the results of that? And you wouldn't probably even be interested in Spirit Gym if you didn't have something to demonstrate that your investments weren't paying out. The other thing is I tell my students and I tell my clients, I don't sell my service, I sell my time. I value my time. I only have 24 hours in a day like everybody else, and I have a family and commitments, and I have to make fair return on my time, or I'm in need of a coach. I have to go hire Jason to coach me. And the other thing that I think is probably the most important of all is we got to remember love is a boomerang. Whatever you put out comes back. That's what the law of karma is, and love is that law. So to the degree you love yourself and invest in yourself, the boomerang of love comes back, and you have others that love you and invest in you. We always have to say, what am I creating with my choices and my resources? And is it creating the life I want to live, or is it creating more to give me an excuse to fall into the victim, the saboteur, or the prostitute archetype, which really can lead to, putrefaction, rotting,
Yeah. It's so important because when I know we're kind of going a little bit on a tangent here, but this is all really key points, because when I studied the essence of what makes a successful Wall Street or business person or entrepreneur, at the same time, what makes a successful spiritual person or leading a fulfilling spiritual life, at the core essence of it is one simple thing, which is the pursuit of mastery. It's the pursuit of excellence. It's pushing yourself to the limits of what's possible for you, to the limits of perfection in this lifetime. Ultimately, this individuation process, this process of becoming yourself, of mastering your own life, mastering your body, mastering your mind, mastering your emotions, mastering your relationships, mastering your spiritual connection, those are the things that whatever you take that as the core essence into, whether or not it's relationships, into work, into spiritual life, that those are the simple building blocks that are needed for any kind of success in any endeavor. And to me, that's what Spirit Gym essentially is. It's a mastery program to learn how to be the best version of yourself, to learn what makes you tick, what kind of relationship do I want to be in, how do I feel love, how do I give love, and how do I actually make my mark on the world. And by getting clear on those things, by learning the discipline and the tools needed to be a master of your own life, then you can be successful in any endeavor, in any field that you choose.
And, I'm sure you're familiar with the famous teacher and multi-millionaire Bob Proctor. Bob Proctor was once asked, what's the difference between successful people and everybody else? And he said a very simple, clear answer. He says, successful people are the ones that are willing to do the work everybody else is unwilling to do. And that's the only difference, right? Now, you know very well, it's one thing to just do a lot of work, and it's another thing to be skillful about it. And that's why we need mentors and guides, like I've told many people and inspired a lot of people to join your Abundance Archetype program. Because I'm like, if you're going to go learn abundance, you better go learn from someone that has it, right? If you want to learn health, don't go to sick people. If you want to learn to be a professional race car driver, don't go to someone who keeps crashing their car. If you want to learn to be healthy, you better go find a healthy person. So, I think once you are clear that you're ready for change, you're ready for growth, and you have a sense of, it's important for me at this point in my life to figure out what my dream is, then be really ready to do the work that most people won't do. Carl Jung says the average man can never be successful. And Spirit Gym's not for average people, because they're not going to change the world.
Yeah, and I think there's one more point on that too with this working hard is that I think what we can realize through understanding ourselves and by going through the principles of Spirit Gym that it's actually about working smarter, not
Yeah.
necessarily harder. And in my understanding of where we're going in the world, that the key ways to work smarter and actually probably the skills that are most needed in the future in a professional endeavor and to stay alive and to be abundant and to have a fulfilling life are access to the things that are more right
Oh,
brain
definitely.
oriented. But the left brain orientation is likely going to be dominated
Yeah.
by AI, and that the access to the right brain and ultimately access to one's heart through the creativity, the intuition, the imagination, novel idea generation, the soul connection, the heart understanding, that these are actually the things that can consolidate multiple hours of being at the desk down to a flash of a eureka moment if you understand how to set up an environment and to do the meditations or the exercises to get those kind of creative insights that come from altered states of consciousness or through various different tools that you teach and that I teach. And so I think going forward, it's the idea of success, and it opens up another question too of what does that even mean to you? It's like the part of this process of Spirit Gym is answering that question. What does that look like? Is that money in the bank? Is that a healthy family? Is it a healthy body? Is it all of the above? Because we've had a distorted idea of what does success actually mean. But once you get clear on that, it's not necessarily about working 20 hours a day. It's about how do I use all of myself? As Dr. Kareem says, we're accessing most of the time like 1% of the available
Yeah.
information. Visible light, sound, smell, it's like 1% to 3% possibly of what's available. But when you tap into the invisible, which is what you're teaching, when you tap into your intuition, you tap into the wisdom of your body, my God, there's so much more available to you that enables you to do those things in a more efficient way and thus be more successful and achieve your dreams more efficiently to give you more time to do the other things that you
Yeah, and
wanna
I
do.
think as you know, we're in a very dangerously left brain culture. Here we are dealing with scientism and scientocracy and technocracy, and this is all heavy, heavy left brain Ahrimanic stuff in Steiner's conception. But the left brain is actually what puts the narrative into a stream of consciousness. For example, if you have like when I take people through the lessons on how to create your myth, identifying your myth is a right brain dreaming process, but writing it is a left brain process. The point I wanted to make in response to your comment on left brain versus right brain is that your left brain cannot contextualize anything that your right brain doesn't already have its hand on. The right brain is the brain of wholeness. It's the brain of seeing how everything fits together. The left brain is the brain, myself as a teacher, I have to use my left brain to explain to my students what my right brain's already aware of. But if I haven't opened my heart enough and been vulnerable to the mystery, then my right brain doesn't keep reaching and looking. In other words, the horizon stays exactly where it's at. So as we explore, and Spirit Gym's really a deep exploration, as we explore, we're like pioneers. All of a sudden we get to the top of another mountain and we can see, oh my God, look, there's an ocean over there. Then we take a boat across the ocean, we see, oh my God, look at those mountains. And so the right brain is what's pushing the horizon and trying to bring in as much of a sense of connection, which is the right hand path of positiva. Look to see how far the territory goes. How far do the stars go? What is this idea about God? But then the left brain can take and draw from the well of the right brain. But when you raise people in a culture where there's hardly any right brain activity, you're reading too soon, you're doing mathematical process too soon, you're being tested and graded, you're afraid to dance, you're afraid to be naked, you're afraid of the dirt, you're afraid of germs. So you now have a left brain that can only draw on a very, very narrow circumference of right brain possibility because the education system is designed specifically to shut your desire off, to reach beyond the confines that the control oligarchs have put in place to keep you under control. And really, Spirit Gym is a lot about becoming free and not following rules that are not ultimately lawful. Because in my philosophy, to follow any law that is not lawful is to be criminal in the action. In other words, if I tell you it's a law that you've got to eat poison and take drugs that are dangerous, and you do it, you're actually your own worst criminal, because you're killing yourself by being too unintelligent to think outside of the box.
Well, you're breaking the key law, which is
exactly,
self-love.
and common sense in many instances.
Yeah. I think it's so on point what you're talking about, because there has to be a balance between, might we say, pushing and pulling. This is why the Quakers say pray and move your feet. You can't just go and pray and open up to the right brain and hope to get all of these great visualizations and ideas without actually doing the blood, sweat, and tears and doing the hard work. But if you do the blood, sweat, and tears only, you're never going to be pushing the horizon and opening up to new possibilities, and you're going to be probably spinning your wheels a lot more than you have to. So I think those two together are actually the key. Those two coming into the center, might we say the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic, or the right hand and the left hand. And, obviously we've been more in the Ahrimanic in nature in society, and more in the left brain in society. And so coming back to the right, might we say, and opening up to these other possibilities will put us back in the center, which will ultimately lead us to our heart, which is, I think, where the man and woman of the future needs to go and is going in order to progress and evolve.
Yeah. There's a author, I'm trying to remember his name. He wrote a great book on mythology. But he said something in there that struck me like lightning. He said, only the heart can deliver justice to the head. And I think that's so important. It's more important today than ever because of the social environment we're in, the political environment we're in, the medical environment we're in, the military environment we're in. We're at a point now where we really got to be conscious of the fact that every dollar we spend is funding some kind of an influence on our future. And if we're making decisions with our money without our heart involved, then it's going to be death by ideology, death by fear-based decision-making. But to let your heart lead your head requires tremendous bravery. You really have to be a true spiritual warrior, because you also have to question yourself and ask, is this belief or is this decision I'm about to make actually contributing to making me feel more safe, more whole, more connected in the long run? Or is it some kind of a short-term Band-Aid or an avoidance of having to look at my belief systems or my ideas? Or is it really me just trying to spend money to avoid doing the work and avoiding the risk of being different than the crowd and therefore possibly being chastised because I'm different? And so that's where the warrior has to come in. So as we get through the principles later, I'll talk about the importance of the spiritual warrior, because it takes a lot of bravery to really create freedom for yourself and live your own dream.
Yeah, it totally does. The word heart has all of the keys in it, because it has art, A-R-T, it has hear, and it has earth. So we have the art of hearing, or the art of hearing the earth, of art of hearing everything that's around you. You are then kind of moving into that more receptive state that the heart opens up.
And it's also related to hearth. And so the hearth is kind of like the beam on top of the fire, where we often put things that are of importance to us, symbols of worship. And I think really what Spirit Gym is your own hearth. It's where you decorate your internal space and your external space with the things that you feel are worthy of your sacrifice and worthy of your intention and attention, so that you can put energy into what you want to grow instead of what you don't want to grow.
So, Spirit Gym is a massive amount of information. And so, speaking of the hearth, if there was a hearth sitting above Spirit Gym, who are the great chief sources of inspiration in the development of the Spirit Gym teachings? Who are the ones that are up on the altar that you're blowing smoke to that are really present in this work?
Well, there are a few key people that have had the greatest influence on me. From the time of age 12, Yogananda's teachings really transformed my life and still are an anchor for me to this day. As you mentioned earlier, there's, probably, more than 1,000 references throughout the books of, great thinkers and great people. But some of the key people that really have touched my soul deeply enough to live their principles and teachings and include them in my professional work as a therapist and teacher and my own clinical practice in life are Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, Rudolf Steiner, Gene Gebser, Ken Wilber, Arthur M. Young, Joseph Rael, Hazrat Inyat Khan, Ibn al-Arabi, Henry Corbin. There's a long list of them, but those are some of the people. But I must say that the people that have paradoxically contributed the most to Spiritism are the people that came to me with challenges that were so deep that I really had to go the extra mile as their therapist or life coach to dig deeper into myself and into my library to try to help them resolve their riddles and my own riddles. So I really, because I devoted my life to helping other people live their dreams and have healthy bodies and freedom, like I look at all the years you and I have been working together, as we've shared in other podcasts, you and I have worked together through some pretty damn challenging times in your life, from, divorce to, a huge loss in the stock market at one point, to health challenges and almost dying. And so there's just one example of where your life brought things to my life that became part of my life that were important to me, not only because of my esprit de corps as a therapist, but because of my love of you as a person and my love of your family. And so I think that at the end of the day, the people that I mentioned first were the people that I leaned on to get answers for the problems that I wouldn't have been exposed to without all my clients and all my students. So you could really say the greatest influence on Spiritism is all the people that came to me with challenges that then became my challenges as well.
I'm curious, this is kind of occurring to me, but who would you say would be, might we say the negative teacher, the anti-teacher, but who would you say out there is the most challenging to Spirit Gym, that pushed you to go deeper into yourself to really think and develop it? Is there something, an author or a teacher or somebody out there that you've met that gave you the most having to dig into your work to really understand it deeper through almost like a contradictory approach?
It's organized religion. I've seen more lives damaged and destroyed by organized religion. And I don't mean the real religion. I mean the manipulation of religion to control people's minds. More people's problems than anything stem from their beliefs in God, which are programmed into their head by religions. And, when you look at the fact that, I've got books in my library showing you approximately how many people are at what level of psychological development. And when you get to the highest levels of development depicted either in Ken Wilber's model, Arthur M. Young's model, Gebser's model, if we say that what percentage of human beings are enlightened, Osho says it takes 6 billion people to produce one truly enlightened person. But if we look at say, at values structures, like Claire Graves' values tree or spiral dynamics, you get to what's called the second tier. So you go all the way through the colors beige, red, beige, purple, red, blue, etc. Then you get to yellow. Yellow is the beginning of the second tier. Then you got yellow and turquoise in Claire Graves' model. But what Claire Graves showed is that only about 1% of the world population makes it to the second tier. And those people, on average, have 10 times the problem-solving abilities of all the people below them. So if you take one person in a university that's at yellow or turquoise, they have more problem-solving ability than probably everybody else in the university combined. So I forgot what the question was. I'm sorry, I got caught in my thinking process.
I was talking about what challenged you the most in writing of Spiritism, and you were talking.
Oh yes,
about
thank you for
religion.
that. So what I was really trying to say is that when you look at who the people are that are teaching Sunday schools and indoctrinating people in universities and in Sunday schools and in temples, it turns out the people that are programming you with these beliefs are often some of the most unenlightened people of the world. Shankara says no man needs scripture when he's enlightened, and when he's enlightened, he doesn't need scripture. No man can understand scripture until he's enlightened, and when he's enlightened, he doesn't need scripture. So what we have is we have a lot of people imposing ideas about what God is, what God wants, what God demands, what God will do to you, but they don't really understand anything about God. All they're doing is cut and pasting what their torturers did to them and believing it. And so for me, that's where I really learned a lot. I learned a lot by observing what is it that catches most people and causes the most problems. And then I said, I have to go look at this. And I would give a tip to everybody, and that is the safest way to actually understand your own religion is to study the mystics of that religion, because they're the ones that went beyond the dogma. Most of them risked and crucifixion or death, and many of them did die for telling the truth. Because when you become enlightened, you actually have a direct experience of God, and therefore you know beyond ideas written on paper. This is why Rumi says to get to God, you must become a heretic. So I think the biggest source of inspiration for me wasn't so much people, it was looking at what caused people's problems and then going to the religions and the beliefs that led to the problems. A lot of people's addictions track back to fear of God. And then looking at the mystics. And it's always an amazing experience for me to get some dogmatic Christian who could have any number of crazy ideas, but one of the most common ideas that I have to deal with from Christianity and other religions, but particularly Christianity, is people are very unhappy in their marriage, and they have been for a long time, but they think that because they made this marriage vow till death do you part, that if they get a divorce, that God's going to burn them in hell, or they're going to get some kind of a terrible punishment. So they have this idea that God will love you as long as you're in a miserable relationship and you're teaching your kids how painful a marriage can be and how to have a shitty relationship. But God won't love you if you're honest and free the other person to find somebody that is ideal for them so you can find someone that's ideal for you. So the real joy for me is if I sit that person down and say, well, let's kind of look at what Meister Eckhart would have to say about this, or Father Thomas Keating, or St. Hildegard of Bingen, or, in other words, I find if I go outside of the religion or even try to use common sense, you can't compete with a religious ideology with common sense or another religion because they have defense memes built into them. So what you got to do is you got to go to the people that are in their religion that already transcended the dogma. And it's amazing when people actually start reading authentic literature from authentically enlightened people from their own religion, how the lights will come on, and it's like God does the work for you. You just got to point them to the right bookshelf,
Yeah.
you know?
I think religions are quite a paradox because, the whole process is interesting in that you have to move out of the sort of the fundamental structure of religion and almost go into a negation process where you get rid of it all, and then only to then come to a place where you can see the beauty in it through the mysticism, but then ultimately realizing that every single one of the religions is actually only holding one piece of the puzzle in the larger
Yeah.
tapestry of life, and ultimately opening up to a love of all of them. I could look at Islam and enjoy like the amazing poetry and the amazing music and the amazing art, and I could look at um, Vedanta and kind of explore all of those. But I think that's really the key is, if you listen to, Hazrat Inayat Khan or Yogananda, they're all referencing multiple streams of
Yeah.
religions and traditions. And that's ultimately, I think, the key is that, as Dustin DePerna talks about, each one of them has their own value. The Western religions has the gift of structure. The East has the gift of the vantage point, and the North and South shamanic traditions have the gift of the entheogens and the state shifts and the altered states. And all of them are holding a piece of a puzzle of really one great world religion that we're all a part of, and we have the opportunity to wake up to and see the beauty in it. But everyone's, I guess, on a different stage.
Well,
of
it's
that
interesting
process.
to give you an example of the significance of the problem we're speaking about. Paramahansa Yogananda wrote a 2-volume set called The Second Coming of Christ. So isn't it a paradox that an Indian mystic writes a book to help Christians understand Christianity? Because he too saw the same problems. He saw that these people were not enlightened enough to understand the Bible. So he basically wrote a 2-volume set to help them understand the authentic teachings of Jesus. And so there you go. Like once you're a mystic, you understand world religion.
Once you understand Christ consciousness, you understand Krishna consciousness, you understand Buddha consciousness.
All of it.
Right. So because in that state we're moving beyond the individual and into the archetype that it's
Yeah, well, you're
representing.
moving beyond ideology into the authentic experience of love. Right. And love has no meaning without relationship. And what is a culture? It's a bunch of people that share similar ideologies and relationships, a Western culture versus an Eastern culture, for example. And I think one of the things that's beautiful about having a community is that you get people of different religions and different ideologies and different professions and backgrounds and experiences. And just like we like music from all over the world and food from all over the world and, clothing items from different countries and art from all over the world, when you can be in a group where you have enough people in it to have enough viewpoints and it's safe to share your viewpoints and your cultural concepts, it really speeds growth and development a lot.
Yeah, and that's one of the beauties of technology right now is that we have this opportunity to come together in this way from people all around the world, different time zones, different lifestyles, and meet together. And it's really a beautiful advantage. Of course, sitting in front of the screen all day has its negative path too, but it's certainly a beautiful opportunity that we've never had before in the history of the world. I mean, if you just think about the amount of music we have on our iPhone, that's more than a king would have had hundreds of years ago. I mean, we could go on our phone and have access to any piece of music that we ever wanted to. We have so much abundance. I think sometimes we don't even realize what we even have, and we have to be very careful about appreciating that and being mindful of it so it doesn't overcome us.
Well,
at
the old
time.
saying, you don't know what you got till it's gone. And the secret really is to try to not wait till it's gone, to develop a spiritual appreciation for everything that we have, because if God is God, then what we have is God's embodiment and God's story. And it's God that makes the trees grow and the birds sing and the water flow and the stars shine. So, that's the problem with materialism, is that it's empty. There's no spirit in their matter. But for me, I see God everywhere and in everything. And so I don't have to dream about worshiping a God in the sky or in some imaginary location, because, I'm talking to this microphone, which is held together by atoms, which are made of protons, electrons, and neutrons, all of which are somehow dancing around at this just under the speed of light, holding a formation that allows me to communicate to you and everybody listening. And that's very, very magical. But without that realization, then it's just another microphone, who gives a shit, throw it out the window, get another one, etc. And so when the world falls into the hands of a spiritually deprived, materialistic culture, then we don't have a living, breathing Gaia. We have a bunch of things. We have objects. And people don't have a tendency to worship objects, but they do have a tendency to worship living, breathing embodiment of spirit. And that's really what Spirit Gym's all about. Spirit Gym, right? It's all God breathing itself into existence so that it can wake up to itself. And it's up to us to participate in that, or we slow everything down. I mean, that could get to a very deep philosophical conversation, which I'll avoid for now. But the reality of it is many people have a hard time conceiving of the fact that God needs to wake up to itself, because they think God is some perfect disconnected being that's watching or that set the world in motion like a watch and just now lets go of it. But that there's so many holes in that belief that, it would take me 20 hours to finish plugging them all.
Yeah. I was just thinking about what you said about you don't know what you have until it's gone. And I think probably the most important thing is our life.
And
we don't know what we have is to wake up and to be so grateful for this opportunity and to get involved. And that's why I think it's so important to be involved in this program, because it's like, this is, your life is precious. Tomorrow is not a guarantee. And, you do not want to be looking back at your life with woulda, shoulda, coulda, or regrets. It's an opportunity to accept where you're at, to be grateful for what you have, to forgive yourself for any kind of mistakes in the past, and to engage with life today, because you will miss it when it's gone.
Yes. It's kind of like, and I've seen this happen many times in my career. It's kind of like thinking your spouse and then concluding that she's not very interesting and that you're not in love with her anymore. But then when she leaves you, falls in love with another person or man and gets married, and all of a sudden you realize you loved her more than anybody you ever loved in your life, but now she's gone, it's a bit late. And my point is if we don't see God, which is ultimately unknowable, in each person or each animal or each tree or each plant, then we tend to objectify them. Like, I think Jason's always going to be the same. I think Kara's always going to be the same, or Penny or Angie or whatever. And so now they're just, biological robots walking around, which is kind of like the World Economic Forum's idea. But when you really realize that often we're as much a mystery to ourselves as we are to other people. So if you engage each person in each relationship with the open heart and open mind of a child, like, no matter how many times I've visited with Jason, I always know no matter what happens when we come, something new and interesting is going to pop up. Or I'll learn about some aspect of your life I didn't learn about before, or vice versa. but I think it's always just going to be the same again. Oh, that's going to be boring, and that's how we fall out of the mystery of love, is to objectify things. And I think when we engage life as a mystery, then it's always new, because we're always looking for clues. That's called paying attention.
It's like, can you treat your partner like you're meeting him or her for the first time every time they walk into the room? Can you imagine that it's a new person there? Can you use the meta skills of curiosity and openness and, a child's like mind to realize that this person may have gone and processed something and may not be the same person that you just met, the same old person that you think you always know. In the same way, can you look at yourself in that same way and open up to a possibility that you could be a new person today, that you could learn something new, and then you could make steps in the right direction?
I think that's where it's got to start. Looking for the mystery in other people, but ignoring it in yourself always limits how much you can see in another. Because just like you can't love someone else more than you can love yourself, you can't actually see in another more than you can see in yourself. And the danger of doing that is they'll become your next addiction. And that's what projection is. You see, instead of becoming the star that's within you, you fall in love with the star on your television screen and think that's God. But really, they're there to inspire you to find that same level of passion and genius within yourself. And I think that's what stars are supposed to do. They're not supposed to turn us into worshipers and gaga slobber on the floor followers. They're supposed to inspire us by showing us what's possible when you really are passionate about exploring and becoming, and I think that's one of the beauties of having a community, is because there's always people that are stars at something, right?
It's so true. And it's, this is probably a longer conversation, but, it's not just the stars, it's the people we despise too. Are there to inspire us to look at ourselves and to find that in ourselves, and actually to grow and change ourselves to meet the resistance. So everything there is really spiritual.
Yeah.
The things that we love and the things that we don't love, the light and the dark, and the shadows and the projections. It's all kind of grist for the mill, so to speak. And those same opportunities could come up in community and spirit gym, where you see somebody that is attractive to you, that inspires you, and you could also find a situation where you're like, this not something that I want to be like, and that could be an amazing teaching for you as well.
One of the key things about knowing where you want to go is being clear where you don't want to go. And there's people around us all the time showing us what it looks like to be addicted to alcohol, or to be dogmatic, or to be violent, or whatever. So kind of the surprise of God is God leaves clues everywhere. I mean, when you actually wake up to God, you see, not only does God have a very wild sense of humor, but God is the great teacher, the great lover, the great warrior, and God is actually so willing to challenge itself, it becomes the devil, and puts the pitchfork right up your ass and says, "Here, try this. Let me see if you can love now."
It's funny. I was listening to this song with our friend Yahuma, and it's talking about there's this guy singing about, like, really kind of like the amazing awe of God, and he goes into this part where he's talking about, like, how many things do you need to see for you to believe in this? Like, how many miracles, how many amazing synchronicities? And he keeps saying, "Can't count them, can't count them." The reality is if you really open up to the magnificence of opportunity of seeing God in everything all of the time, it's literally uncountable. It's so amazing how every single person, every single animal, every single dream is an opportunity to get closer to this connection and feeling of God.
Hi, everybody. This is Paul Chek. I come to give you a little message. I want to share some empathy. I know how hard it is to change your behavior when you got some bad diet and lifestyle habits, and you look at that coffee, or you look at the sugar, or you look at the junk food that you're in love with, and you reach for it because it's quick and easy, and you keep telling yourself, I need to change, I need to change, I need to change. But eventually the system breaks down and you get motivated by the pain teacher. But what if I gave you an opportunity to try something that would help you start the process of behavior change and enjoy it and look forward to it? Well, I have something for you. It's Organifi's red juice. It tastes great, and it's loaded with nutrition and lots of vitality for you. And I got Drew Canoli here to tell us why it works so well for behavior change and increasing your life force and your vitality. Drew, what's the magic in that red juice? Because everybody seems to love it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul. Sometimes when we're craving things, it's hard to switch a habit, a behavior.
Yeah.
So I looked at that fundamental fact and I'm like, well, what could we create that people could crave that actually tasted great?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when red juice was born for
Good.
energy. So between the berries, the blueberries, the raspberries, the strawberries,
Yes.
the best quality organic glyphosate residue free,
Yes.
the rhodiola and the cordyceps,
Yes.
we were onto something. We sweetened it with a dash of monk fruit. And literally, I started to come to life when I drank this. I had so much more energy than I would normally have. Stamina went through the roof.
Yeah.
I actually shaved off 45 seconds off my mile time drinking red juice before I ran.
Wow.
Talk about an uptick in nitric oxide production in your body, right?
Something went up.
Yeah.
We know speed
Actually,
went up.
it's funny you say that because I get messages all the time about sexy time.
Oh,
And
yeah?
when people drink red juice, they're
Something's
like,
going up.
something's going up. And I get so many messages about that. That's funny you brought that up.
Well, we hope it's the flag these days.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're looking for more energy and stamina and something that tastes great to where you could shift your cravings,
Yes.
keeping your hunger and your energy in check
And feel good about it.
and feel good about it.
And you might even break down a little bit and wander back. But if you've got some natural sweetness and a lot of nutrition, you probably, if you're honest with yourself, won't need as many chips or as many of whatever your little thing is.
Yep.
But you can do this naturally and easily. And that's what I'm all about. Naturally and easily and honestly. And, it all starts with being honest with yourself. So if you want a great tasting behavioral switch technique that's really good for you, it has a lot of knock-on benefits for you and your whole family, try red juice. Go to Organifi.com, Organifi.com. And because I love you, Living For You listeners, so much, I've organized for you to get a 20% discount with the code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20. And that's as fast as I can say that. I love you guys. Enjoy your red juice.
So, Paul, I want to get into the nuts and bolts of this program, which really, to me, is the master key. It's like the big image, which, you've also made beautiful jewelry out of it. I have to say, it's an amazing necklace that you made. And I know it's throughout your course. So you have this beautiful key. Can you talk a little bit about this symbol, what it stands for, and what are the key principles and practices you feel people need to be conscious of within this master key?
I'll just, in case this video does get shared, this is a picture of the master key. So I'll thank Steve Panico. He took my drawing and gave it a body beautifully. And then William Arthur does the exotic jewelry, and his jewelry is fantastic. So I thank Steve and William for their beautiful contributions to Spirit Gem. And I want to make sure I thank Amy Fournier, because she's my business partner who provided the finances to make Spirit Gem possible, because it's been a very expensive program to develop. At this point, I've got over $600,000 invested in the program. And as you know from seeing it, it's very, very well done. And thank Mike from Freedom Builders for making it beautiful. Mike Gonzalez, Freedom Builders, BUILDERZ.com, if you want to do an online course with someone that's a master. So the master key really is an icon that symbolizes the practices, and that's why I had a necklace made. So it's just a reminder, like a mnemonic, of what we're really here to work on. So the master key shows what looks like a big key, a circle, and a wing, a set of wings. One of them's black, representing the implicate order, the spiritual dimension, the invisible that creates the visible reality. And then the white wing represents the manifest or explicate order, the hole and the key represents the unknowability of God, the emptiness of God that produces the fullness of God. And then we have the principle of Om, which is, we'll get into, and then myth, and then we go from 1. So there's actually 0, Om, myth, then 10. So there's really 13 principles, but the ones that are numbered are the ones that are we need to be conscious of. The other ones are sort of implied in life itself. 1 represents the principle of being, 2 represents duality, 3 represents the dreaming trinity, 4 represents the fact that the number 4 represents wholeness, and there's some of these have multiple applications, which I'll go through. 5 represents the challenge state in the developmental process. 6 is the 6 foundation principles, and 7 is the 7 chakras and the sort of the vehicle of the soul. 8 represents self-reflection. 9 represents a new level of awareness, and 10 represents a new level of being. So when you're looking at the key, those are the key reminders. And in the training program, you have over 80 hours of training with practices to take you into a deep personal experience of not only these principles, but their application in your life on a daily basis, so that you know how to think through these principles.
Yeah, and there's so many layers to these that you get into. For example, somebody can read scripture from a literal perspective, but you can go into a symbolic and inspirational. And in fact, sometimes there's even possibly 10 different levels that one can understand one passage, or, take Rumi poetry, for example. You could spend a whole lifetime unfolding that. And in the same way, each one of these principles has many different layers to them, from the numerology to the tarot to the different levels of principles that exist. And it would be far too much to go into one podcast, but maybe you can go through each one of these principles and give us some key understandings of what we could learn if we were going through the program.
I'll sort of encapsulate them briefly because as you've mentioned, there's many hours of training and they cover a lot. So 0 we've covered is the mystery. It's the unknowability of God. The problem with ideas about God is that you can't know God until you become God. And to become God, you must abolish the ego, so there's no sense of other to witness God. Because God being unconditional, if you enter God with a condition, you can't have God, you've got a condition. So the paradox of God is that you can never actually know God, you can only experience God. There's no way you can put a noun to God, because it concretizes a mystery, and then it's not a mystery anymore, and that means God is dead, functionally or philosophically. So 0 means, remember that ultimately life is a mystery. The source of it and the experience of it provides us experience, but the process of the work in Spirit Gym is to engage the mystery so fully that you embrace the mystery, and knowing that the closest we can get to the mystery is love, then we orient ourselves toward our heart and towards acts of love. And so the principle of Spirit Gym is use your heart to feel what you know, which I'll thank my student Suk for teaching me years ago. And then when facing challenges, we ask the question, what would love do now? And that's how we embrace the mystery of God as love, because then the tangibility of God becomes not only the experience, but what we're creating through the conscious application of the verb of God being love. The principle of Om will show up in the 4. The myth means story, but the ultimate meaning of myth, according to James Carse, is that a myth is a story that tells itself. So God is the ultimate storyteller that is telling the story that is itself, which includes all our stories. And we have to remember that God is infinite. So God has the capacity to tell an infinite number of stories and act them out at the same time. And each of us is the embodiment of one potential. and one character, and we're each not only the leading actor in our story, but we're the cast and the crew for everybody's stories that we relate to. So, you're the leading actor in Jason's story, but I'm cast or crew to you, and sometimes both. Sometimes I'm cast because I'm your buddy, but I'm also crew because there's times I'm a therapist for you or a life coach. So we're all actually playing the leading role of our story, but we're cast and crew for everybody else's story.
This is the fluidity of Wilbur's interior, exterior, 4-quadrant model, is that, you could be in multiple quadrants at one time, right? In a relationship, you have your own personal interior, but you're also part of a family.
Well, you're always in all 4 quadrants. Even if you're dead, you're just in another external quadrant in another dimension, right? So the 4 quadrants, we'll get into that. I'll talk more about that when we get to the principle of the 4. So myth is really quite an amazing mystery, and I put a fair bit of work into the lessons. I probably have the most comprehensive set of lessons in the world explaining what myth is, how it functions, and how to write your personal myth and illustrate it and live it because of the importance of myth. One of the things I make very clear and I get deep into in my upcoming volume 1, which might be out by the time this podcast launches, is the depth of what myth really is. But it's very, very profound. And I think one of the sad things is that the scientific materialistic culture has converted the word myth to be the equivalent of a lie. So the left brain pathology is that we stop realizing what a myth really is, and we start concretizing it as facts and numbers and statistics, and then it loses its meaning. And when it loses its meaning, we lose our sense of sacredness in life because we think we've got it all figured out. And the pain teacher shows up to deliver the mystery of myth once again.
Yeah, an important question you can ask yourself is, if you don't know what your myth is, whose myth
Exactly.
are you living? And that's one of the key points why, right here, just understanding what is the story that you want to live and tell and leave. What's your legacy? All of this can be, really unpacked and unfolded in these myth lessons. They're very, very profound and very practical. Most of us are living a story that somebody else.
And you probably remember from early in our years together, when I started working with you, one of the first things that I did was take you through the process of getting clear on what your myth was and then painting it. I remember the very day that you painted your griffins and your art, and I have pictures of it. And, it's always a very profound thing when you actually invest the time, energy, and open your heart to your own myth, because for the first time you actually have a sense of who you are.
And it's profound for me for 15 years later, being in ceremony and meeting these figures and seeing my own lionness and my own eagleness and my own griffinness, and really the myth as a creative exercise being real.
Yeah. It's very, very, very real. There's nothing more real than encountering what myth is in yourself. So we've talked about zero, we've talked about Om, we'll talk about more, we've talked about myth. One is the principle of being. And to love, you have to be. So you could say to love is to be, and to be is to love. Like I can't have a relationship with Jason if I can't first be. And being is very important because we can always tell when someone's being with us and when they're not being with us. When someone's not really there, it leaves a sense of emptiness in the relationship, and it often leads to insecurity because you don't really know if that person cares or is interested or loves you. So from the principle of being, existence itself, or spirit gem, is God's being. So a simple way to, if you say, what is spirit gem? It is God's being. And it is because God is being that God can be experienced and explored through love and relationship. The principle of the 2 is duality, without which we cannot have consciousness. We always have to have a subject, perceiver, object, the perceived relationship to be conscious of. If the subject in me is aware of the object I see on the screen that represents Jason's body and Jason's posture and facial expressions and gestures. So we can't love without duality either. There's always a lover and a beloved. So the subject is the lover and the beloved is the object if you correlate subject object with lover beloved. And so to make meaning, you have to have a duality. Otherwise, you cannot separate anything from the wholeness of God. So the mind actually needs a duality in order to isolate something from the wholeness to direct its awareness to, its attention, intention, and love to. So basically, the principle of the two is the requisite of consciousness itself. And another example is we have the self of us, which is the soul, the unconscious, the superconscious, and the ego. So there's always an ego-self relationship. For example, we have a conscience, and that is potentially the voice of the self, or we have a soul inside of us that gives us a heartfelt sense of, yes, we're doing the right thing or we're not doing the right thing. So that the ego is always in relationship to the greater self. And that's what gives us our sense of self, is that we have the thinking, processing aspect that we think is our self, but we have the deeper aspect that's the mystery of God within us, which is the self. So those principles are inherent in duality, and those are essential because you can't be conscious and you can't love without a duality.
Can you briefly talk about, I know this is a big question, but talk about how the principle of two, how are you defining consciousness, what consciousness is, how that relates and connects to love and mind as definitions? Because these are things we're throwing around there, but I think it's important for people to understand what your definition is and how you teach these various things.
There's a lot of definitions of consciousness. One, Annika Harris says, you're conscious if there's something it's like to be you or to be something. So, like, if I was to merge my soul with Jason, and then someone said, what's it like to be Jason? In order to describe what it's like to be Jason, I would have to be conscious in order to describe it. If I was to put my soul into a ladybug and I could describe ladybugness, then I would have to be conscious in order to do that. Consciousness is also described by Edward Edinger, MD, a psychiatrist and Jungian analyst who's passed away but was a genius. He said, consciousness is a psychic substance produced not blindly, but in living awareness of opposites. So when he says consciousness is a psychic substance, he's saying it's tangible, it's real. For example, there's a difference between being asleep and being unconscious. Somebody could steal your whole house out from underneath you. You wake up and the whole house is empty. You wouldn't even know it happened because you were unconscious. But then when we're awake, we're in a waking state. We're conscious. So if a bug lands on you, you know it. So consciousness is really a psychic substance because it gives us something to perceive that's tangible, that has the potential to change the course of events in our life. If you're unconscious, then you're sort of a victim to the flow of the river that you're in. If you're conscious, then you can steer the boat. So Etzok Bentov says consciousness is the total flow of information in any system. So you could say your consciousness is the total flow of information in the system of the self. So those are a few of the distinctions. Love really relates to mind because you cannot have a mind without 2 points of sentience between which information and energy flow. I define love as the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self or other, which is very close to Dan Siegel's definition of mind. Mind is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. But if there's not 2 points of sentience, there's nowhere for energy and information to go that can be consciously perceived. So in order for my mind to work, for example, I can be thinking thoughts within myself and observing those thoughts. So the self of me is the container for the conscious process, and I therefore have a duality. I have an observer and that which is observed, and that flow of information between the observer and the observed creates a mind. If I'm sharing information with you right now, then if I give a concept that flows from me, a sentient being, to you, which gives you an idea that flows back to me, so there's an exchange of energy and information between 2 points of sentience, which is a lot different than a computer talking to a computer, because no matter what information you're sending back and forth between those 2 information processors, there is no way for them to make meaning out of it. There's no emotional content. There's no qualia. There's no smell, touch, feel, taste. Those are qualia. A computer will just as well give you a recipe for how to destroy yourself as how to live a life of meaning. This is why artificial intelligence, for example, can never become conscious, because there's not a sentient being within which information is being transferred. So it's an information processor. It's not a mind.
It's interesting when you think of that in the context of the mind of God and the relational process that is required, and the importance of all of us being here as points of relationship to each other and to God itself in order to have this process, and that this is something that is, difficult to personify, but that it is an intelligence and a being that is feeling and is having experiences that we can relate to.
And the paradox, just like the ego creates a personification of the self, God's dreaming itself into existence as the myriad of characters spread throughout every dimension of existence allows God to be the subject in relationship to the object of its own dreaming, which is each living being.
Yeah. I love that, because when you think of that in the context of dream analysis, when you look at dream analysis, everything in your dream is a part of you. And so in that same context, all of us are a part of God's dream. And in the same way, it should really open us up to a deep richness to understand our life as a symbolic life. Because if the fabric of reality is dreamlike in nature, then our lives are dreamlike in nature, which allows us to become lucid and to change the dream and to dream the dream on, and to look at everything in our life as if it's pointing to somewhere else, and it has deeper purpose and meaning and intelligence, and not just random events.
Yes, and one of the key functions of Spirit Gem is to become a conscious co-creator with God, because all the inherent qualities of God exist within us. So it's one thing to be dreaming unconsciously, and it's another thing to be lucid in your dream, because then you're awake. Once you're awake in a dream, so if I have a dream, I'm having a meeting with Jason, and I'm unconscious, I might just have flickers of memory. It's like, God, I think I had a dream about Jason last night. But if in the dream I realize I'm dreaming and I say, hey, Jason, what brings you to visit me? And you say, well, I'm building this new water charger in back of my house, and I wondered what you thought about this or about that. And I say, well, here's what you do. Change the type of rock you're using here and cut it this shape, and you'll get just the right result. Now that I'm co-creating in the dream, paradoxically, both of us are most likely to wake up and remember exactly what we meant about and talked about. So when you become lucid in the dream, you actually are given license by God to co-create in the dreaming process, which is what real freedom is. Then you have free will. Until then, you're just kind of, an effect of the dreaming process, not a cause in the dreaming process. So then we move on from the 2 to the 3. So that's really the principle of manifestation. every religion has a Holy Trinity. The Christian one is most familiar: Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. There's all the world religions. In my Spirit Gym book series, I show you about 8 or 10 different Holy Trinities from different religions, so you can see how it works. So we go into the kind of the metaphysics and the physiology of how manifestation works. Then we have the soul, which has a trinity, which is to abide, to reflect, and to represent. Then we look at the 3 psychological essentials, which are individuation, relationship, and competency. And so I show people how to look at where they're at in their individuation process, how to determine if their relationships are fruitful, and where they need more skill to be the person they've chosen to be. Then we look at the 3 primary hormones, because the balance of those hormones is the most critical thing to your health. And those are insulin, adrenaline, and cortisol. So I have a whole lesson on how to look at those factors in your life and recognize what you need to do to balance those. Then we look at the trinity of time, past, present, and future, and talk about what time is and how to work with it. Then we look at the trinity of choice, which we talked about earlier in our 1, 2, 3, 4 explanation. Then we get to the 4, which is a very important one, and there's quite a lot of 4s. Jung said 4 is the number of wholeness. We've got spring, summer, fall, winter, and so that's an example of a cycle. So Om is the master cycle that imprints itself in everything in the universe, from subatomic particles all the way to the life of a universe. So in Spirit Gym, I give Joseph Campbell's and some of the yogis' breakdown of what Om means. Ah, I awaken. Ooh, I'm dreaming. I'm falling asleep. Underscore, rest, end of cycle. So I get deep into an explanation of Om. Then we look at the 4 elements and the alchemical conception of creation through earth, water, fire, and air. And I also take it up several levels higher in Spirit Gym. And I have a whole section on Chek life process alchemy, which you're very familiar with. Then we get clear on Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants. The upper left is the personal interior, the domain of the soul or your own consciousness. The lower left is the collective interior, which is the souls you're sharing relationship in a co-creative process. The upper right represents the manifest body, anything you can weigh or measure about yourself, your hormones, your weight, your strength, your behaviors, anything that can be filmed. And the lower right is the world stage, where we're all acting our dreams out together and growing together. Then we have the 4 doctors. We get into Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Happiness. Then we get into the 4 life process archetypes, which is a system I developed many years ago to help guide my patients and clients in their own individuation process. So those 4 archetypes are the child, the warrior, the king and queen, and then the wise man and wise woman. And so that shows you how consciousness evolves through a life process if we are guided effectively and educated effectively. Then we get into the 4 R's of sustainability, which is relationship, responsibility, reciprocity, and redistribution, which helps us realize how to live in a way to be in harmony with nature so that we don't destroy ourselves by objectifying everything and consuming it like we have been since the industrial age, really. 5 is really a very important principle because it represents the challenge stage of a process. So there I draw on Hegel's philosophy, thesis, your idea, your plan, antithesis, the challenges that go with completion or manifestation, synthesis, working through the challenges to resolve them so that you have harmony and abundance and productivity, and then rest. And then I have the 5 program design factors that I show you are essential to designing an effective program for anyone, be it physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual development. And those are time, energy, willingness, resource availability, and finances. Those all have to be looked at, or you'll make an ineffective program. The principle of the 6 goes deep into nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement. And in some of those, there's multiple lessons. In Spirit Gym, there's multiple. Like I have 3 chapters just on water. I have 2 chapters on food and diet. I have multiple chapters on mind and thinking. And there's many, remember these principles we're discussing now are distributed across 75 lessons and 82 hours of training. So this is a very, very brief synopsis here. The 7 is really an understanding of the subtle energy bodies and how they interface with the physical body. I use the 7 chakra system from the Hindu conception because I found it very practical and easy to work with and reliable. And so I talk about what the soul is from the perspective of the different dimensions that manifest within the human being and the human psyche and the human life, so that we can understand our connection to higher dimensions. And I make correlations between chakras and elements and other factors to show how it all works together. Because I think if people really understand how the soul works, it's easier to have a relationship with this, not such a elusive concept. The principle of the 8 deals with self-reflection. And that's one aspect of the soul, is self-reflection. So there we get into shadow work, identifying what Jung called complexes, looking at our traumas and doing some healing work on those. And we look deeply into our parental programming, and we go through a series of investigations of what I call the big 12 archetypes. I have a core 8, which is the father, the mother, the child, and then the Imago Dei, which is your beliefs about God. And then we have the Carolyn Myce's 4 survival archetypes: victim, saboteur, prostitute, and the negative derivations of the child. And then we have a process for identifying up to 4 working archetypes. So what are the ways that you're expressing yourself in the world right now, and how do you prioritize those so you don't get lost by having too many irons in the fire and not making anything happen in your life, which is real common with the sort of the ADD mindset of people today. The 9, yeah.
You had a very good podcast with Greg Schmaltz on actually 2 podcasts if you want to go deeper into the understanding archetypes.
Yes, Greg and I have had a couple of real great podcasts. And recently we did the archetype wheel, which I found quite fascinating and revealing. And it was pretty amazing how accurate it was. I kind of cracking up sometimes looking at myself there. The principle of the 9 is a new level of awareness. So whenever we grow to where we actually perceive ourselves with greater depth and greater clarity and greater empathy and compassion and understanding, we have reached a new level of awareness. And that is something we want to maintain. We don't want to, as the alcoholics say, fall off the wagon and get pulled back into our old habit patterns and behaviors, which is so easy to do because we're conditioned in that way. I often cite the law of facilitation so that people that are my students understand how easy it is to fall back. The law of facilitation says when an impulse passes once through a given set of neurons to the exclusion of others, it tends to do so on a future occasion, and each time it traverses this path, the resistance will be smaller, which simply stated every time we repeat any thought, belief, or behavior, it becomes more facilitated in the nervous system, and we get to a point where we're doing it autonomically, reflexively, and unconsciously. And the longer we do it, the more facilitated the nervous system gets, the easier it is to do. But oftentimes we have facilitated bad habits or unconscious behaviors that we picked up from our childhood programming or our society or our environment. And so being aware at the level of the 9, you by this time you're aware of what your habits and your tendencies and your addictions are. So by maintaining a state of awareness at the level principle of the 9, we choose to have the discipline and the discernment not to fall into the person we've chosen to grow out of and stay in the dream that we're creating for ourselves and the myth that we've created for ourselves until we're ready to grow out of it, which inevitably does come. 10 is the last principle. It's a new level of being. So now you've made a complete cycle. You could have, for example, gone from child to warrior. That would be one cycle. You could have gone on one hero's journey cycle. But 10 really is a new level of being, which means you no longer have to think about the values and the beliefs and the behaviors that are congruent with your stated dream because they're now inherent in who you are. You don't have to question whether or not you're going to buy organic or whether you're going to go to the gym. You go to the gym because it's part of loving yourself. It's not something you have to convince yourself to do. The 10, though, is a very important principle because there we have to remind ourselves that before we engage another hero's journey cycle or a new path of personal, professional, spiritual development, we need to rest and ground and center and engage our intuition and our redreaming process. So, for example, someone that's just completed the process of healing a midlife crisis or a divorce has to be very careful before they just jump into another career or another relationship because they have to have time to rest and gain some clarity and go into a creative mode of exploration to get clear on what they want to create next. So the principle of the 10 is very, very important because our culture tends to skip the rest and discovery phase and just jump right next into the next project, the next goal, the next big thing. And so what we can do is create a lot of stuff, but find ourselves very, very burnt out and without passion. And that's what's very common in the Western culture is perpetual burnout. So those are the principles that we work with in Spirit Gym.
Absolutely beautiful. This is such a massive amount of education. I just want people to know that, you have plenty of time when you go through this, so don't feel overwhelmed. You can take it in chunks. You have the support of the community. You have the support of Paul, other mentors, and many people that have come before you and will come after you. And, for me, I think it's so important, Paul, because when we look back at some of these institutions that we look up to, like maybe the Self-Realization Fellowship or various organizations, one of the challenges I have of when I look back at some of these people that are considered great teachers is how many future teachers did they create? What came after them? I mean, one of the things that I think we mistakenly do is we keep pointing back so far to some of these teachers without judging them by what have their students created. What art, what poetry, what beauty, what new ways of thinking, or how is that actionable in the world? And what is the succession plan of these people? Instead of just saying, oh, we're going to keep quoting Yogananda, 100 years ago, why that might be valuable. What has come after that in terms of contextually new information in that lineage that is coming today that can be relevant? So, for me, I think the thing that's most inspiring to me is that your program is based around creating future leaders, creating future thinkers. And that the whole idea is to inspire people, to find the prospects, to cultivate them, to empower them, and to enable them to go out into the world, fly and flap their wings. And that, the real legacy is what we create from the people that are in this program. Can you talk a little bit about that, and also talk about a little bit about, what's next for you? What now that you've done this, like, where are you at for this, next segment?
Yeah, what you're leaning on there and pointing to is very important. And in my studies of Osho, he said something that hit me in the heart like a arrow. He said, I didn't come here to create the masses. I came here to create masters. And I said, that's exactly what I'm here to do with the Chek Institute and now Spirit Gym. The masses will not do the work to go through everything we've just gone through in this podcast to outline what Spirit Gym's all about. The average person will always be average. So Spirit Gym is for people that are conscious enough to realize that they have the potential to live the life they want to live, the freedom they want to have, and to dream effectively, and to inspire others to do the same. All the Chek instructors are truly masterful people. I think now there's somewhere between 40 and 50 books written by Chek professionals. And as I said in the beginning of the podcast, many amazing businesses and healing centers. And, look, I'm sitting here with you. Like, I remember 15 years ago, the stockbroker that came to me who was successful in one way, but still really empty to the truth of himself and his potential in many other ways, and now runs an abundance archetype program and has done years and years of training and therapy and really has the power to completely change the world. And so that's really, like, there's a lot of amazing people in Spirit Gym. A lot of the Chek instructors are in Spirit Gym. So really, I follow in Osho's footsteps. I didn't come here to create the masses. I came here to create the masters that will inspire many, many others to be the change that the world needs right now. My only dream for the future right now is just to really perfect Spirit Gym, to finish the 15 volumes. I've written well over 3,000 pages. I've still got to write the workbook sections for several of the volumes. I just want to really focus on my podcast and on growing Spirit Gym. I think there's nothing I can do that's more effective for the world and is more of an authentic expression of my heart and the knowledge I've gained than to pass it on to as many people as possible. Even though people pay me a lot of money for private coaching, I can only help one person at a time. And I have a feeling of like I'm moving in the wrong direction doing one-on-one coaching and therapy. So I've got so many trained people out there that I can refer people to. I think the most important thing I can do is really put my heart and soul into Spirit Gym. And that's when I feel like I'm on my dream line. I probably have about 150 small books I'd like to write once I get through with everything in Spirit Gym. I love the podcast, so the podcast is a real passion of mine. And I just really want to make sure that my children get into the Spirit Gym training through being with mommy and Penny and Daddy, and that I hope that as many of the people in Spirit Gym as possible inspire their children to be practitioners of Spirit Gym, either by entering the program when they're ready or just by living it because they're influenced by this way of relating. Because I think we need children to be more awake and more well-educated than ever before for obvious reasons. So I have a real passion for doing everything I can do to help children be effectively educated and have a healthy relationship with God and their abilities to dream. And because I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old and a grandson that's 3, I have the practices in my house every day. So I get to see the outcome of watching my own children, pray for their food and see the land as sacred, the animals as sacred, and, not take things for granted and really have some passion and some love. So I think that's really my focus for the rest of my life. I don't think there's anything more important than that I can do with my life.
This may be redundant here, but are there any areas of personal spiritual growth or personal growth that you want to focus on outside of the service? Is there an area of yourself that you'd like to expand and work
I'm
on?
always really focusing my efforts on 2 things. How can I love more fully, love myself more fully, and love others and life more fully, and embrace the reality of the impermanence of life, the challenges of life, and just going deeper into my relationship with my soul, my spirit, which is the self, which is God within, because that's the only thing that I have for sure is that relationship, and that's the only thing I can take with me when I die. You know, when you lose your body and your ego, what you have is what you've developed through your spiritual practice, which is your level of consciousness aside from the five senses. So I've gained so much from my relationship with my soul, and it's made me feel so much safer in the world, and it's given me so much more confidence that I can help people solve their challenges in life. Because once you get to the level of the soul, you're connecting directly to God, and each of our souls is connected to every other soul at the level of the unconscious. So I find the deeper I go into my soul, the more efficient and effective I am at helping other people resolve their puzzles and their paradoxes and their challenges, because I don't have to go to their ego, which is often confused. I can go to their heart or their soul and get the information that I need to support them, which then helps their ego wake up to its own relationship with their soul, so I can invite them to join me in that practice.
Amazing. It's been so nice having this time together.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably well aware of Paul's amazing YouTube channel that has years and years and years of free content on there, and his amazing Instagram. But if people are curious about how to find out more about Spirit Gym in particular, where should they go to
myspiritgym.com. Just like it sounds, myspiritgym.com as a URL. And then for our personal workshops here up at our home here, the Rainbow House, you can go to paulchek.com, and there's a tab there so you can see our workshops that we run up here. And then for my professional health education and public health education is chekinstitute.com. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/Paul Chek Live.
A lot of great content on there. Thank you for all of what you do, all of the service you provide for everybody. I think we're all very grateful for your life and your efforts and your hard work, and overcoming all the challenges that you've overcome, and being able to spin them into a beautiful tapestry of amazing education and experience and wisdom for all of us.
Thank you. I mean, it goes without saying, you're living, walking, breathing proof that the principles and practices of Spirit Gym work and help people grow into being the person they came to the world to be. And you're my best buddy. So God not only delivered me a great client, but a best buddy. And so, thank you for trusting me to be a source of guidance for you for all these years, and for inspiring so many other people yourself, because it's lovely for me to know that you're out in the world guiding people, because I know they get excellent guidance with love and honesty. So, and thanks to all the sponsors. I really appreciate your love and support. And thanks to all of you guys. And if those of you that want to get the long play of the podcast, the extended play, you can go to paulchek.com and become a podcast member there. And I'll look forward to another amazing podcast in a week or so. Every Monday or Tuesday we launch, depending what platform you're on. And Jason, you and I have another podcast coming up where we're going to dive into some neat topics and talk about some of the aspects of the Abundance Archetype program. And so thank you for all the great podcasts you and I have had together too. I've loved them.
We're on quite a roll.
We'll give lots of love to the family, and thank you, Jason. And thanks to all of you guys. Aho. See you next time. See you in Spirit Gym. myspiritgym.com.
It is done. It is done.
Great spirit.
Great spirit.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and Jason Pickard. If you'd like to explore Spirit Gym for yourself, you can sign up for the free mini course where Paul shares 3 key lessons from Spirit Gym that you can use in your life right now. Go to myspiritgym.com/mini course invite to get your 3 essential lessons to create more love, life, and freedom. That's myspiritgym.com/mini course invite. Catch up with Paul on Instagram and TikTok at paul.chek, on X at paulchek, or on his YouTube channel, youtube.com/Paul Chek Live. You can connect with Jason via his website, jasonpickard.org, or on Instagram at jasonpickardofficial. Check the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast for details on the special offers from our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.